Hi everyone, welcome to the Hidden Hokage channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today we'll be looking at Hidden Leaf Village lore. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1, the village's bloody origins. The Hidden Leaf Village started with two kids skipping stones across a river. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha met as children during the Warring States period, when ninja clans hired themselves out as mercenaries and bloodshed never stopped. Their clans, the Senju and Uchiha, had been killing each other for generations. The boys didn't share their last names at first, they just competed over who could skip stones farther, talked about their frustrations with the constant war, and dreamed about a world where kids didn't have to fight. Both of them had watched their brothers die on the battlefield. Hashirama lost Kawarama and Itama. Madara lost multiple siblings too. They vented to each other by that river, trained together, and imagined something different. A place where children could grow up without becoming soldiers, where clans could stop slaughtering each other over contracts and territory. This friendship gave them hope during one of the bloodiest periods in shinobi history. The dream nearly died the moment they discovered each other's identities. When their fathers found out a Senju and Uchiha had been meeting in secret, they tried to force the boys into an ambush. Hashirama's father, Butsuma, told his son to kill Madara or be branded a traitor. The boys chose to walk away from each other rather than fight. Madara awakened his Sharingan from the pain of losing his only friend. For years after, they met on opposite sides of battles, Hashirama leading the Senju, Madara leading the Uchiha. They fought over and over, locked in a stalemate neither could break. Hashirama couldn't bring himself to kill someone he still considered a friend. Madara couldn't defeat Hashirama's superior abilities. The turning point came when Hashirama cornered both Madara and his last surviving brother Izuna. Hashirama tried one more time to convince Madara they could end the fighting by uniting their clans. Izuna, mortally wounded by Tobirama in battle, convinced Madara to refuse and they retreated. When Hashirama sent a ceasefire request anyway, some Uchiha started defecting to the Senju out of exhaustion. The Uchiha were losing. Madara, consumed with grief after Izuna died from his wounds, made one final stand and lost. Tobirama moved to execute him on the spot, but Hashirama stopped his brother. Madara suggested Hashirama kill himself if he really wanted peace. Hashirama agreed without hesitation. He prepared to take his own life right there to end the war. Madara, shocked by the gesture, stopped him and agreed to the alliance. The Senju, Uchiha, and their affiliated clans founded Konohagakure together, a village whose name Madara himself invented while looking through leaves at the forest. Children would train together instead of fighting to the death. Clans would protect each other instead of competing for contracts. Hashirama used his wood release to build most of the village's infrastructure. Other nations saw what they'd created and started forming their own hidden villages. The Warring States period effectively ended. The problem started immediately. Hashirama wanted Madara to become the village's first Hokage. He saw it as a way to show trust, to give the Uchiha equal standing to heal the wounds between their clans. Tobirama refused to let that happen. He forced the position to a democratic vote, which Hashirama won easily. The Senju had more allies, more political support, more influence. Madara saw exactly what this meant. The Uchiha would always be the junior partners. The Senju would control the village's direction. The peace they'd built depended on the Uchiha accepting a subordinate position. Tobirama made it worse with his policies. He created the Konoha military police force and put the Uchiha in charge of it. On the surface, this looked like an honor, giving the Uchiha exclusive control over the village's law enforcement. The reality was different. The police force kept the Uchiha busy with internal security while the Senju and their allies controlled foreign policy, military strategy, and political appointments. The Uchiha compound got pushed to the outskirts of the village. Clan members found themselves isolated from the decision-making that shaped Konoha's future. Tobirama also created the academy, the Anbu, and the Chunin exams during his time as Hokage. These institutions worked brilliantly. Other villages copied them. They helped Konoha bond its clans together and fostered relationships with other nations. They also served another purpose. They shifted power away from individual clans and toward the Hokage's office. The academy standardized training across all clans. The Anbu answered directly to the Hokage. The Chunin exams promoted individual achievement over clan loyalty. Tobirama was building a system where the village mattered more more than any single clan. In theory, this would end the clan conflicts that had defined the Warring States period. In practice, it meant the Uchiha had less and less influence as time went on. Hashirama pushed the Will of Fire as the village's core philosophy. Every shinobi was part of one large family. The village came before the clan. You fought to protect your comrades, your Hokage, your home. Previous generations passed their hopes and dreams to the next through this shared bond. It sounded beautiful. It became one of Konoha's defining principles, something every Hokage after Hashirama emphasized. The Will of Fire inspired incredible acts of sacrifice and heroism throughout the village's history. That same philosophy demanded constant sacrifice. Protecting the village meant dying for it when necessary. Children graduated from the academy and went straight into missions where they might be killed. The Will of Fire framed this as noble, as carrying on the dreams of those who came before. It gave meaning to the deaths. It also normalized sending kids into lethal situations because that's what previous generations had done. The cycle continued. Hashirama tried to stabilize the shinobi world by distributing the tailed beasts. He had captured most of them using his wood release abilities during the First Shinobi World War. His plan was to give these massive weapons to other villages for free, evening out the power balance so nobody would risk another war. Tobirama insisted the other villages pay for the tailed beasts they received. The first Kazekage demanded money and territory in exchange for taking one. The summit showed that Hashirama's idealism crashed against political reality. Villages saw the tailed beasts as bargaining chips and strategic assets, precisely the kind of arms race Hashirama wanted to prevent. The distribution backfired completely, giving every major village a tailed beast meant giving them the ultimate military deterrent. When conflicts did break out, villages used these weapons against each other. The 3 tails, the 8 tails, the 9 tails, they all became tools of war despite Hashirama's intentions. The beasts got sealed into Jinchuriki, who villages treated as weapons and outcasts. Hashirama's attempt to create peace through equality of force just raised the stakes for every future conflict. Madara saw all of this developing and grew increasingly bitter. The stone tablet in the Uchiha Shrine, which had been altered by Black Zetsu centuries earlier, though Madara never knew this, told him about an ancient cycle of conflict between Uchiha and Senju. It described the infinite Tsukuyomi as a way to end all suffering. Madara became convinced Konoha was repeating the same patterns that had defined the Warring States period. The village had peace, but peace built on the Uchiha accepting a diminished role, while the Senju consolidated power. He tried to convince his clan, and even Hashirama, that the village needed restructuring. Nobody listened. Madara left Konoha and later returned with the 9 tails under his control, challenging Hashirama to one final battle. They fought at what would become the Valley of the End. The devastation from their clash carved out the entire landscape. Hashirama tried to reason with Madara throughout the fight, but Madara kept attacking until exhaustion left him vulnerable. Hashirama stabbed him in the back. Madara died, or so everyone believed. Konoha took possession of the 9 tails after the battle. The truth was Madara had used Izanagi, a forbidden Uchiha technique, to rewrite his death. He survived in hiding with a piece of Hashirama's flesh, which he'd taken during their battle. Decades later, as Madara reached the end of his natural life, Hashirama's cells awakened the Rinnegan in him. This gave Madara the power to set in motion everything that would eventually lead to the Fourth Shinobi World War. Before he died for real, Madara passed his plans to Obito Uchiha, who operated under Madara's name for years. The village's founding was supposed to end the cycle of children dying in battle. It did stop the constant clan warfare, but it created new problems. The systems Tobirama built pushed the Uchiha toward the margins. The Will of Fire justified sacrifice after sacrifice. The tailed beasts Hashirama distributed became weapons anyway. Madara's betrayal would haunt the Uchiha for generations. The friendship between 2 kids skipping stones created the Hidden Leaf Village. That same friendship, ending in violence at the Valley of the End, set up conflicts the village would deal with for the next 70 years. The village, born from Hashirama and Madara's dream of peace, quietly rebuilt the same power imbalances and sacrifices it was meant to destroy, and the Uchiha clan would be the ones crushed by that failure. Section 2. The Uchiha Downfall, a tragedy decades in the making. The Uchiha clan went from co-founders of Konoha to slaughtered outcasts in less than 70 years. The massacre that killed nearly every Uchiha didn't happen overnight. Decades of systematic marginalization, institutional distrust, and political maneuvering created the conditions where Konoha's leadership saw genocide as the only solution. Tobirama's military police force positioned the Uchiha as internal security while keeping them away from actual power. The clan ran law enforcement within Konoha's walls, which looked like an honor. The reality involved constant surveillance of their own people and exclusion from foreign policy decisions. The Uchiha compound sat on the village's edge, physically separated from the rest of Konoha. The Senju and their allies controlled the Hokage's office, the Anbu, and strategic planning. The Uchiha got to arrest drunk civilians and patrol empty streets. This marginalization bred resentment. Younger Uchiha grew up hearing stories about Madara's partnership with Hashirama and how their clan helped create the village. They saw their current situation as a betrayal of those founding principles. The gap between the Uchiha's proud history and their diminished present created a wound that never healed. Fugaku Uchiha, the clan head, walked a tightrope between the loyalty to the village and responsibility to his clan. The Nine Tails attack shattered whatever fragile trust remained. On October 10th, a masked man unleashed the Nine Tails on Konoha, causing massive destruction and killing hundreds. The fourth Hokage died, sealing the beast into his newborn son. Konoha's leadership immediately suspected Uchiha involvement because the Sharingan could control tailed beasts. The fact that Obita Uchiha actually orchestrated the attack didn't matter, because nobody knew he'd survived. Konoha's elders simply saw the Sharingan's distinctive tomoe reflected in the Nine Tails' eyes and jumped to conclusions. Danzo Shimura pushed hardest for containment measures. He convinced the third Hokage that the Uchiha posed a security threat. Konoha's leadership relocated the entire clan to the village's edge under the guise of reconstruction efforts. This forced relocation made surveillance easier and sent a clear message that Konoha's government didn't trust them. The Uchiha understood exactly what this relocation meant. Fugaku called clan meetings in the Nakashirain's basement to discuss their options. He had awakened his own Mangekyo Sharingan during the Third Shinobi World War and kept it hidden even from his clan. Some members pushed for immediate action, wanting to seize control before Konoha struck first. Others advocated for negotiation. Fugaku listened to all perspectives while privately hoping for a solution that wouldn't require bloodshed. His attempts to negotiate with Hiruzen Sarutobi went nowhere. The Hokage wanted peace, but Danzo and the other elders blocked any meaningful concessions. Every failed negotiation pushed the clan closer to open rebellion. Itachi Uchiha attended these meetings starting at age 11 after joining Anbu. He understood that a coup would lead to civil war, which would weaken Konoha enough to invite invasion from other villages. A coup wouldn't just destroy the village, it would trigger another world war. Itachi became a double agent, reporting the Uchiha's coup plans to Konoha's leadership. He gave them information about meeting times, which members supported military action, and what strategies they were considering. The third Hokage appreciated the intelligence but struggled to act on it. Danzo undermined every negotiation attempt. Shisui Uchiha was Itachi's closest friend and the clan's most talented ninja. The clan tasked Shisui with watching Itachi, suspecting his strange behavior. Shisui confronted Itachi and learned the truth. Rather than expose him, Shisui revealed he shared Itachi's opposition to the coup. Shisui believed his Mangekyo Sharingan ability offered a solution. His right eye contained Kotoa Matsukami, a genjutsu so powerful it could rewrite someone's thoughts permanently without them realizing they'd been manipulated. Shisui planned to use it on Fugaku and other coup leaders to make them abandon their plans peacefully. Danzo discovered this plan and saw it as a waste. He believed the technique should be saved for a more critical threat. Danzo ambushed Shisui and stole his right eye. Shisui escaped and immediately went to Itachi. He handed Itachi his remaining left eye and begged him to protect the village and the Uchiha name. Shisui threw himself into the Naka River before his body could be recovered. The Uchiha found Shisui's body the next day and immediately accused Itachi of murdering him to steal his eyes. Some Uchiha cornered Itachi and demanded answers. Itachi, traumatized by his best friend's death, lost his composure completely. He awakened his own Mangekyo Sharingan from the grief and used it to defeat the Uchiha who attacked him. This confirmed the clan's suspicions. Fugaku confronted Itachi in the Naka Shrine's basement. He revealed his own Mangekyo Sharingan and explained that he wanted to use both their powers to restrain Konoha's leadership in a bloodless coup. Fugaku presented this as a middle path between continued oppression and total war. He asked for Itachi's help. Itachi left that meeting and immediately reported everything to the Konoha Council. The third Hokage still wanted to negotiate. Danzo disagreed completely. He met privately with Itachi and laid out two options. Either the Uchiha attempted their coup and everyone died in the resulting civil war, including Sasuke, Itachi's 8-year-old brother, or Itachi could kill the clan himself before they launched the coup, sparing Sasuke's life in exchange for preventing the war. Itachi decided the only way to honor Shisui's memory was to accept Danzo's deal. The night of the massacre began with Itachi meeting Obito, who was posing as Madara Uchiha. Obito wanted revenge on the clan that had abandoned the real Madara and was happy to help. The two moved through the Uchiha compound systematically. Obito attacked the military police force headquarters while Itachi dealt with civilian members. Itachi saved his parents for last. He walked into their home expecting a fight. Instead, Fugaku and Mikoto knelt before him calmly. They told Itachi they understood why he made his choice and that they were proud of him. They asked only that he take care of Sasuke. Fugaku noted that if Itachi had been honest from the beginning, they might have found another way. Itachi killed them both while crying. Sasuke returned home from the academy moments after his parents died. He found corpses throughout the compound. He ran home calling for his mother and father. Instead, he found Itachi standing over their parents' bodies with a blood-stained sword. Itachi trapped Sasuke in Tsukuyomi, forcing him to watch their parents' murder on repeat for 72 hours of illusory time. When Sasuke finally broke free, Itachi explained that he had killed the clan to test his own power, and that Sasuke was too weak to deserve death. Itachi told Sasuke to hate him, to desire revenge, to grow strong enough to kill him someday. Sasuke tried attacking Itachi with a kunai, his Sharingan awakening from the trauma. Itachi easily disarmed him and poked his forehead. He promised to wait for Sasuke to become strong enough to challenge him. Then Itachi left. Sasuke passed out from exhaustion and trauma. He wouldn't remember seeing Itachi cry for many years. All he retained was the image of his family's killer. The massacre left Sasuke as the sole surviving Uchiha in Konoha besides Itachi. He woke up in a hospital surrounded by people who pitied him. The village told him Itachi had gone rogue and was now a missing nin. They offered counseling and support. What they couldn't offer was the truth about why his family died. Sasuke was 8 years old, traumatized beyond anything the village could address, and fixated entirely on killing his brother. Revenge became the only thing that gave his life meaning. Sasuke's hatred was rational given what he knew. He believed his brother murdered their entire clan for personal power. He spent his childhood surrounded by buildings that used to house his relatives, walking streets where his cousins used to play. The village memorialized the third Hokage, but never acknowledged the Uchiha who had been killed by one of their own. The real tragedy was that his hatred was aimed at the one person who loved him enough to destroy himself, saving Sasuke's life. The truth about the massacre stayed hidden for over a decade. Konoha's leadership maintained the cover story that Itachi acted alone. The third Hokage felt guilty but couldn't reveal the truth without destabilizing the village. Danzo kept it hidden to protect his own role. Itachi wanted Sasuke to see him as a villain who deserved death rather than a martyr. This conspiracy of silence meant Sasuke grew up hating his brother without ever understanding why Itachi made the choices he did. Konoha solved the Uchiha problem by burying the truth in blood, and that lie exploded the night the Nine Tails turned the village itself into the next victim. Real quick, if you're enjoying this, make sure you're subscribed. It's free and helps us keep these videos coming. Alright, let's keep going. Section 3. The Nine Tails attack the night everything changed. October 10th became the date that split Konoha's history into before and after. The Nine Tails attack wasn't a natural disaster or an accident. It was revenge carefully orchestrated by someone the village had already mourned as dead. Obito Uchiha, the teammate Kakashi, thought he'd lost during the Third Shinobi World War, had survived his injuries and spent years planning how to make Konoha suffer. When he learned that Kushina Uzumaki, the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, was about to give birth, he saw his opening. Childbirth weakens the seal that contains a tailed beast. Minato, the fourth Hokage, and Kushina's husband knew this and took every precaution. He relocated Kushina to a secret location outside the village, stationed Anbu guards, assigned the third Hokage's wife, Biwako, as the midwife, and erected barriers. None of it mattered. Obito tracked them down, killed everyone except Minato and Kushina, and snatched their newborn son Naruto as leverage to keep Minato from interfering. When Minato teleported away to save Naruto, Obito ripped the Nine Tails out of Kushina and released it on Konoha. The beast tore through the village like a natural catastrophe given malicious intent. Buildings crumbled under its tails, entire districts burned. Shinobi died by the dozens trying to slow it down. Hiruzen Sarutobi, who had retired as third Hokage years earlier, came out of retirement to lead the defense alongside his wife. When Minato arrived to help, Obito tried to trap him in another dimension using his space-time jutsu. Minato barely escaped, and during their fight he branded Obito with a Flying Thunder God seal and hit him with a Rasengan. The attack forced Obito to release his control over the Nine Tails, but the damage was done. The fox was loose, Kushina was dying from the extraction, and Konoha was being destroyed. Minato teleported the Nine Tails away from the village to buy time. He knew he couldn't kill it since tailed beasts eventually reform after death. He couldn't reseal it in Kushina since she was already dying from having it extracted. His only option was to seal it into Naruto, splitting the fox's chakra in half to make the process survivable for an infant. The Reaper Death Seal required the caster to sacrifice their own soul, so both Minato and Kushina used their final moments to tell Naruto how much they loved him before dying in front of their son. The attack lasted less than an hour, but the casualties were staggering. Hundreds of shinobi died, many of them trying to evacuate civilians or form barrier teams to contain the Nine Tails. Thousands of civilians perished in the destruction, either crushed under rubble or caught in the beast-tailed beast balls. Entire bloodlines were wiped out when family compounds collapsed. The Sarutobi clan lost their matriarch when Biwako was killed at the birth site. Children watched their parents parents die, parents search through ruins for children who would never be found. The memorial stone would need an entire new section carved just to accommodate all the names. The infrastructure damage was equally catastrophic. Multiple training grounds were reduced to craters. The hospital was partially destroyed, forcing emergency triage to happen in whatever intact buildings remained. Supply routes were cut off where bridges had collapsed. The academy took structural damage that would require months to repair. Water systems were compromised, forcing the village to rely on wells and emergency reserves. And this all happened while Konoha was still recovering from losses sustained during the Third Shinobi World War, which had ended barely a year earlier. Hiruzen became Hokage again that night. He was 69 years old, exhausted from years of leadership, and had just watched his wife die during the attack. Minato's dying wish was for the village to see Naruto as a hero who housed the Nine Tails rather than the fox itself. Hiruzen tried to honor this, but the villagers couldn't separate the container from the monster. They'd lost family members, friends, and homes. When they looked at Naruto, they saw the beast that had orphaned their children and destroyed their lives. Hiruzen made it illegal to mention that Naruto was the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, hoping the younger generation wouldn't inherit their parents' hatred if they didn't know the details. He also hid Naruto's connection to Minato to protect him from his father's enemies. The decision made practical sense but had unintended consequences. Naruto's monthly stipend from the village and his placement in his own apartment at such a young age made him conspicuous. People knew something was different about him even if they didn't know the specifics. The secrecy also meant that anyone who could have explained things to Naruto properly was forbidden from doing so. He grew up knowing he was hated, but not knowing why. The adults glared at him in shops, charged him inflated prices, refused him service, and whispered when he passed. The children, taking cues from their parents, bullied and isolated him without understanding what they were imitating. The Uchiha military police force had been conspicuously absent during the attack. They'd been kept busy responding to disturbances on the village's outskirts, which later seemed like an intentional distraction. The coincidence fed suspicions that someone had orchestrated their absence. Combined with the fact that the Sharingan could control tailed beasts, Konoha's leadership became convinced an Uchiha was involved. They were partially right, but for completely wrong reasons. When the village forced the Uchiha to relocate their compound to the village's edge shortly after the attack, supposedly for reconstruction purposes, the clan understood exactly what it meant. They were being blamed and isolated. The economic aftermath compounded everything. Rebuilding required resources Konoha didn't have. The Third Shinobi World War had depleted their funds, and the Fourth Hokage's death before he could establish trade agreements or collect on wartime debts left them in a precarious position. Mission rates from clients dropped because other villages questioned Konoha's strength after such a devastating attack. The Fire Daimyo provided emergency funding, but attached conditions that limited Konoha's autonomy. Hiruzen had to make difficult choices about which districts to rebuild first, essentially deciding which citizens mattered more. The attack had traumatized everyone who survived it. Iruka Umino, who would later become Naruto's academy instructor, lost both his parents that night. Sasuke, who was born 3 months before the attack, would grow up hearing stories about how the Uchiha were blamed for it since the Sharingan could control tailed beasts. The fact that Obito actually was an Uchiha who controlled the Nine Tails didn't matter since nobody knew he'd survived. The suspicion alone was enough to poison the village's relationship with the clan, contributing to the paranoia that eventually led to the massacre. Kakashi's guilt over the attack was crushing. He'd been assigned to help protect Kushina but arrived too late. He spent the immediate aftermath searching the ruins for Obito's mask, convinced the attacker had been his supposedly dead teammate but lacking proof. When he found nothing, he questioned his own sanity. Minato had recognized Obito during their fight but died before sharing that information. So Kakashi lived with unconfirmed suspicion for years, wondering if he'd failed to save his friend completely or if grief was making him see patterns that didn't exist. The village's response to trauma became increasingly militaristic. Hiruzen expanded the Anbu, giving Danzo more resources for Root, despite previous promises to limit his influence. Academy standards were raised to produce more capable shinobi faster. Jinchuriki protocols were rewritten to prevent another incident, though they now had no Jinchuriki to apply them to since Naruto was just an infant. Mission success rates became prioritized over shinobi well-being. The Will of Fire rhetoric intensified, emphasizing sacrifice for the village in ways that started sounding less inspirational and more like obligation. The secret of who attacked the village stayed buried for over a decade. Minato died before he could tell anyone that the masked man was an Uchiha. Hiruzen never found out the truth. When Naruto and Sasuke finally learned years later that Obito had caused the night that ruined both their lives, it nearly destroyed whatever fragile bond they'd rebuilt. Naruto had to process that the attack that orphaned him, made him a pariah, and forced him to grow up alone was caused by someone who'd once been exactly like him, a nobody who dreamed of becoming Hokage and being acknowledged. Sasuke had to realize that an Uchiha really had controlled the Nine Tails, validating Konoha's worst suspicions about his clan even though nobody knew it at the time. Kushina and Minato had planned to be there for Naruto. They'd prepared a nursery, picked out his name, and imagined the family they'd become. Obito took that future away in a single night, and his reasons were entirely personal. He hadn't attacked Konoha because of some greater ideology or strategic goal. He did it because he blamed the village for Rin's death and wanted to make them suffer the way he'd suffered. The fact that his revenge destroyed hundreds of families, orphaned dozens of children, and set in motion events that would destabilize the shinobi world for decades didn't matter to him. He was drowning in his own pain and decided everyone else should drown with him. The Nine Tails attack became Konoha's collective trauma, the event that every major decision afterward had to account for. It justified the Uchiha's forced relocation since the village's leadership suspected Sharingan involvement. It explained why Hiruzen was reluctant to take hard stances against threats, having already lost so much. It shaped Naruto's entire childhood and, by extension, his determination to never let anyone feel as alone as he did. And it all traced back to one person's inability to process grief in a healthy way, combined with a village that had structured itself to make that grief inevitable. Konoha memorialized Minato and the shinobi who died defending the village, but they never properly acknowledged the damage the attack did to the survivors. Naruto wasn't the only one left to pick up the pieces alone. The difference was that his loneliness was enforced by the very people who should have supported him, all while pretending it was for his own protection. The Nine Tails attack shattered Konoha's sense of safety and justified years of paranoia, and while the village mourned in public, Danzo used that fear to build something far worse in the shadows. One quick thing, hit subscribe if you like this kind of content. It really helps us out. Now, let's continue. Section 4. Root and Danzo. The darkness beneath every village has secrets it keeps from its citizens. Konoha's darkest secret was Root, a shadow organization that operated beneath the village's surface for decades, turning children into emotionless weapons in the name of protection. Root existed because one man, Danzo Shimura, believed that peace required darkness, that someone had to do the terrible things others wouldn't, and that he was uniquely qualified to make those choices. He was wrong about almost everything, but by the time anyone realized it, Root had already destroyed countless lives. Root wasn't just another Anbu division, it was something fundamentally different. Regular Anbu operated under the Hokage's direct command and maintained some connection to their humanity despite the brutal nature of their work. Root members had no such luxury. Danzo established Root with a specific philosophy he called the Will of Root. They were the unseen ones who supported the great tree of Konoha from beneath the earth, working in darkness so the village above could thrive in light. In practice, this meant Root carried out assassinations, intelligence gathering, and operations that crossed every ethical line Konoha publicly claimed to. Respect, the organization's top priority, was secrecy, and Root members were forbidden from revealing anything about their missions or even the organization's existence. Danzo accomplished this through cursed seals placed on every member's tongue. If anyone tried to speak about Root or Danzo's activities, the seal would activate and paralyze their entire body, rendering them unable to move or talk. The seal was a perfect representation of what Root did to people. It literally stole their ability to speak their own truth. The training process for Root operatives was designed to erase humanity entirely. Danzo recruited children, often orphans, or those from clans with useful abilities like the Aburame or Yamanaka, and subjected them to conditioning that made the regular academy look gentle by comparison. Root trainees weren't given names, only code designations like Kinoe or Sai. They were taught that emotions were weaknesses that led to hatred, and hatred led to war. To eliminate these weaknesses, Danzo employed a graduation method identical to Kirigakure's infamous academy test. He paired children who had grown up together as brothers and forced them to fight to the death. The survivor would have successfully killed their attachment to other people and could be trusted to complete any mission without hesitation or mercy. Sai and his adoptive brother Shin were victims of this system. Despite Root's conditioning, they formed a genuine bond, with Shin encouraging Sai's artistic talent and the two becoming close. Sai created a picture book depicting their relationship, with portraits of himself and Shin at opposite ends and a planned center image of them holding hands. Before they could be forced to fight each other, Shin died of illness, but not before the final stages of Root training had suppressed most of Sai's memories of their friendship. Sai was left with a picture book he couldn't finish because he no longer remembered what emotion he'd wanted to express in its center pages. When he eventually joined Team Kakashi years later, he had been so thoroughly conditioned that he struggled with basic social interaction, having read in books that giving people nicknames would help him make friends, but not understanding that calling Sakura ugly or nearly calling Choji fat would hurt them. He could fake smiles, but didn't understand what smiling actually meant. Yamato's story illustrated Root's willingness to sacrifice children for power. As an infant, he was one of 60 children Orochimaru abducted and injected with the first Hokage's DNA in experiments to recreate wood release. Orochimaru believed all the subjects had died when he was forced to flee Konoha, but one survived. The boy who would become Yamato endured the experiments while conscious, watching other children die around him in their test tubes. When he used his newfound wood release abilities to escape, Danzo found him and recruited him into Root with the code name Kinoe. Having lost all memory of his life before the experiments, the child had no identity beyond what Root gave him. Danzo personally trained Kinoe, seeing enormous potential in someone who possessed the first Hokage's legendary ability. He gave Kinoe a scroll containing wood release techniques and pushed him to master abilities that should have been far beyond a child's capacity. The emotional toll of Root's methods created weapons, but weapons that sometimes malfunction. When Danzo sent Kinoe and another Root member to steal Kakashi's Sharingan as a replacement for Danzo's deteriorating eye, Kinoe encountered Kakashi during a mission investigating one of Orochimaru's abandoned labs. Kakashi's words about friendship and his visible pain over failing to protect Rin broke through years of conditioning. Kinoe realized he had wanted to save the other test subjects in Orochimaru's experiments the same way Kakashi had wanted to save Rin. That recognition of shared trauma created the first Kraken. Root's programming. When Kinoe chose to abandon his mission rather than steal from an ally, Danzo was furious enough to have him marked for execution. Only Hiruzen's intervention saved Kinoe's life, and only after Kakashi risked everything to protect him. Kinoe was transferred to regular Anbu under the name Tenzo, though Danzo refused to remove the cursed seal on his tongue, ensuring some measure of control remained. Root's operations extended far beyond Konoha's borders, and Danzo had no qualms about manipulating other villages for what he believed were Konoha's interests. During the Third Shinobi World War, he formed an alliance with Hanzo of Amegakure, promising to help Hanzo crush the rebel group Akatsuki in exchange for Hanzo's support in making Danzo Hokage. Danzo went so far as to stage attacks on Amegakure villages using Root members disguised as a Wagakure ninja, then presenting the corpses to Hanzo as proof that Akatsuki was targeting his clan. This manipulation led directly to the confrontation where Yahiko died and Nagato unleashed the demonic statue of the Outer Path, killing nearly all the Root and Amegakure forces present. Danzo's machinations thus created one of Konoha's greatest future threats. Nagato's transformation into pain, his belief that peace could only come through overwhelming violence and suffering, stemmed directly from the trauma of that day. Danzo's attempt to control Amegakure's internal politics ultimately resulted in Pain's assault on Konoha decades later. Danzo justified everything through what he called pragmatism. He believed Hiruzen's idealism and mercy made Konoha weak, that peaceful coexistence with other villages was naive, and that someone needed to make the hard choices Hiruzen refused to make. When Hiruzen sought to end the Third Shinobi World War through a truce, Danzo considered it an insult to every Konoha shinobi who had died fighting. When Shisui Uchiha proposed using his Mangekyo Sharingan ability to peacefully end the Uchiha clan's planned coup by altering their perception, Danzo stole Shisui's eye and drove him to suicide because he didn't trust anyone else to wield such power. When Hiruzen decided to negotiate with the Uchiha clan, rather than take preemptive action, Danzo manipulated Itachi into slaughtering his own family by presenting it as the only way to prevent a civil war while saving his younger brother. Every atrocity had an explanation, a reason why it served the greater good, but none of those explanations acknowledged the fundamental problem with Root's entire existence. Danzo wasn't accountable to anyone. Hiruzen knew about Root for years but allowed it to continue operating. He convinced himself that Danzo's methods, while distasteful, served a necessary function. Someone had to handle Konoha's dirtiest work, and letting Danzo do it meant Hiruzen could maintain his image as a compassionate leader while still benefiting from Root's intelligence gathering and eliminations. It was a convenient fiction that let Hiruzen avoid confronting what was being done in Konoha's name. When Danzo finally went too far by orchestrating the Uchiha massacre, Hiruzen officially disbanded Root and removed Danzo from the council. But this was largely performative. Root continued operating in secret, with its members' loyalty remaining with Danzo rather than the Hokage. Hiruzen's failure to truly eliminate Root or hold Danzo accountable meant the organization persisted for years after its supposed dissolution, continuing to recruit and condition children and carry out unsanctioned operations. The human cost of Root's existence became most visible in its survivors. Sai eventually learned to form genuine bonds with his teammates on Team Kakashi, but it was a painful process of unlearning years of conditioning. He had to teach himself that caring about people wasn't weakness, that showing emotion wasn't dangerous, that being vulnerable with friends was strength rather than liability. When he encountered his reincarnated brother Shin during the Fourth Shinobi World War and watched Deidara use Shin as a human bomb repeatedly, Sai experienced genuine rage for the first time in years. His tears, when Shin was finally freed from his suffering, represented both grief for his brother and mourning for all the years Root had stolen from both of them. Yamato similarly had to reconstruct an identity from pieces, having lost his original name and memories and spent his formative years as a test subject and child soldier. His wood release made him invaluable to Konoha, but it was a constant reminder of the experiments that had killed 59 other children. His survival wasn't triumph, it was random chance that left him as the only living proof of Orochimaru's most heinous project. Root members who remained loyal to Danzo faced impossible situations after his death. Some, like Sai, found new purpose and gradually rebuilt their capacity for human connection. Others, like Tanuki Shigaraki and his daughter Sumire, became pariahs when Root's actions came to light. Tanuki had been one of Danzo's top researchers, working on a weapon called the Gozu Tenno that was meant to harvest chakra and manifest as a giant creature that would rampage through enemy territory before self-destructing. When the village shunned Root members after Danzo's death, Tanuki grew to resent Konoha and completed his project, implanting it in his daughter with instructions to use it to destroy the village in revenge. Sumire carried that mission into the next generation, an embodiment of how Root's damage persisted even after the organization itself was gone. It took intervention from people like Sai and Boruto to break the cycle, to convince Sumire that she didn't have to inherit her father's hatred or complete Danzo's abandoned projects. The fundamental problem with Root was that it operated on the assumption that peace required darkness, that someone had to commit atrocities so others could maintain their innocence, but this assumption ignored a crucial truth. The atrocities themselves created more enemies, more trauma, more reasons for conflict. Danzo's manipulation of Hanzo created Pain, who destroyed Konoha. His theft of Shisui's eye and manipulation of Itachi created Sasuke's desire for revenge against the entire village. His experiments with Orochimaru created weapons like Yamato, but also gave Orochimaru access to Hashirama's cells and the knowledge he needed for his own projects. Every attempt to strengthen Konoha through Root's methods ultimately weakened it by creating new threats or destroying trust. Root existed because Danzo believed he could save Konoha by doing the things others weren't willing to do, by bearing the darkness alone so others could remain pure. In reality, he created an organization that traumatized children, eliminated potential allies, and operated without meaningful oversight while claiming moral authority through its supposed dedication to the village. The Hokages, who knew about Root and allowed it to continue, bore responsibility for every atrocity Danzo committed. Hiruzen's passive acceptance of Root's existence, his willingness to benefit from its operations while maintaining plausible deniability about its methods, made him complicit in every child soldier trained, every unsanctioned assassination, every manipulation of foreign politics. When Danzo died, he spent his final moments wondering what he meant to Hiruzen, whether his rival had ever truly valued him despite their conflicts. He never got an answer, but perhaps he didn't deserve one. Danzo had spent decades causing suffering in service to an ideology he claimed was necessary, stripping children of their identities and emotions, manipulating global politics, and committing treason against the very village he claimed to protect. His conviction that he alone understood what Konoha needed, that his methods were justified by his goals, was the same. Arrogance that defined Root itself. The organization wasn't noble darkness supporting the village from below. It was a demonstration that good intentions combined with absolute power and zero accountability create systems that destroy the very things they claim to protect. Root's legacy wasn't a stronger Konoha, but a generation of broken weapons slowly learning to become human again, and a village forced to confront how much suffering it had tolerated in the name of security. Root proved that Konoha's greatest damage came from its own leaders, and the next section shows how even its most celebrated heroes continued that destruction in quieter, more personal ways. Section 5, 3 legendary students, 3 different paths. Hiruzen. Sarutobi's greatest achievement wasn't his leadership as third Hokage. It was the 3 students he trained who became known as the legendary Sannin, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru. Each became powerful enough to be considered for Hokage. Each should have been a pillar holding up the village. Instead, their personal failures created cascading disasters that would haunt Konoha for decades. The Sannin were supposed to be the generation that secured the village's future. They became the generation that nearly destroyed it. Orochimaru was the prodigy. Even among 3 geniuses, he stood out. Hiruzen saw in him a once-in-a-generation talent, someone who understood jutsu at a level that bordered on supernatural. But genius without compassion is just intelligent cruelty. Orochimaru's parents died when he was young, and rather than processing that grief, he decided death itself was the enemy. Not to the wars that killed people, not the systems that sent children to die, just death as a concept, which he would personally defeat through forbidden jutsu and human experimentation. Hiruzen knew that's the part that matters. Hiruzen watched Orochimaru's research grow darker. He knew about the experiments, he knew about the kidnappings, and when he finally caught Orochimaru red-handed with a lab full of dying test subjects, Hiruzen couldn't bring himself to execute his former student. He let Orochimaru escape. That moment of sentiment cost Konoha, the third Hokage's life, hundreds of ninja casualties during the Konoha Crush invasion, and set Sasuke Uchiha on a path toward darkness. Hiruzen's love for his student enabled a monster, but here's what makes it worse. Hiruzen had considered making Orochimaru fourth Hokage, the village's most gifted ninja, sure, but also someone Hiruzen knew lacked understanding of what it means to be a ninja of Konoha. Hiruzen recognized the emptiness in Orochimaru, but nearly gave him absolute power anyway. When Orochimaru didn't get the position, he saw no reason to stay. He'd already been conducting human experiments as a Konoha ninja, even serving en route under Danzo. The fourth Hokage selection didn't create Orochimaru's monstrousness, it just made him stop pretending to be loyal. Orochimaru spent years dismantling everything Konoha built. He kidnapped 60 children for wood release experiments. Most died. The sole survivor, Yamato, became a tool for Root before eventually serving Konoha. But the trauma of being Orochimaru's test subject never fully left him. Orochimaru helped murder the fourth Kazekage and wore his face during the Chunin exams, orchestrating an invasion that killed his own teacher. He built Otogakure as a rival village specifically designed to hurt Konoha. He groomed talented children like Anko Mitarashi and Sasuke Uchiha, twisting their potential toward his own goals, and through it all, Jiraiya tracked him, fought him, tried to convince him to return, and failed every single time. Orochimaru's defection also revealed how the village's systems enabled monsters. He didn't go from loyal student to war criminal overnight, he worked with Danzo en route. He conducted experiments for years before Hiruzen caught him. Other people knew, other people benefited from his research. Danzo used Orochimaru's Hashirama cell experiments to create weapons to enhance his own body, to build power. When Orochimaru finally left, he took with him knowledge of Konoha's darkest secrets, making him not just a threat, but a blackmail risk. The village couldn't fully condemn him without exposing its own complicity, which brings us to Jiraiya, the one the fandom likes to remember as the good Sannin. Jiraiya was good at many things, gathering intelligence, training talented students, writing popular novels. He was terrible at commitment. When the Ami orphans needed him most after 3 years of training, Jiraiya left. He told himself they were ready. They weren't. Nagato had the Rinnegan and trauma from watching his parents die. Konan had abandonment issues. Yahiko had dreams of peace, but no framework for achieving them in a world designed for war. Jiraiya gave them the skills to become powerful and then disappeared back to Konoha. The AIM orphan story shows what happens when powerful training meets insufficient emotional support. Jiraiya taught Nagato to control the Rinnegan. He taught them advanced ninjutsu that made them legends in their own right. He inspired them with talk of breaking cycles of hatred and creating peace. Then he left them in a war-torn country surrounded by people who wanted to exploit Nagato's eyes, with no support system except each other. When Danzo and Hanzo manipulated events to kill Yahiko, Nagato had the power to summon the Gedo statue, but not the emotional framework to resist despair. Jiraiya had given him tools, not stability. He did the same thing to Naruto, in a way. Jiraiya became Naruto's godfather when Minato and Kushina died, and then he vanished for 12 years. While Naruto grew up alone, hated by the village, Jiraiya was out gathering intelligence and writing porn. He showed up when Naruto was 12, trained him irregularly, took him away for 2.5 years, and then left him again. When Jiraiya died investigating Pain, Naruto called him the person he respected most. That's not a compliment to Jiraiya, it's an indictment of how few people actually stayed in Naruto's life. The tragedy of Jiraiya is that he was genuinely talented at teaching. Minato became 4th Hokage, Nagato could have been the child of prophecy who saved the world. Naruto eventually did save it, but Jiraiya's commitment always came with an expiration date. He'd train someone, see their potential, inspire them with dreams, and then abandon them to figure out the implementation alone. When Nagato became Pain and attacked Konoha, that wasn't just Nagato's failure, it was Jiraiya's. He had given Nagato power and philosophy without staying around to help him process the trauma and manipulation that twisted both. Jiraiya's spy network was impressive. His intelligence gathering kept Konoha ahead of threats for years. But intelligence without action is just interesting information Jiraiya knew about Akatsuki. He tracked Orochimaru, he investigated threats across the shinobi world, and when those threats came to Konoha anyway, Orochimaru's invasion, Pain's assault, the 4th Shinobi World War, Jiraiya wasn't there to help defend the village because he was always somewhere else, chasing the next lead, writing the next novel, training the next prodigy he'd eventually abandon. Then there's Tsunade, who responded to loss by running away. Her brother Nawaki died at 12 the day after she gave him their grandfather's necklace. Her lover Dan died in her arms from injuries she couldn't heal fast enough. Both deaths traumatized her so severely she developed a hemophobia, a medical ninja who couldn't stand the sight of blood. Her response was to leave Konoha during the 3rd Shinobi World War, taking her student Shizune with her, and spend decades gambling and drinking while refusing to use her medical skills. Tsunade's absence mattered. She was the world's greatest medical ninja, granddaughter of the 1st Hokage, someone with knowledge that could have saved thousands of lives. Instead, she wandered between casinos, racking up debts, aging herself down with a transformation jutsu so no one would recognize her. When Jiraiya finally found her to offer her the position of 5th Hokage, her first instinct was to refuse and insult every Hokage who'd held the title. She called it a fool's job. She said only idiots died for the village. Tsunade's bitterness wasn't entirely unjustified. She'd watched people she loved die for Konoha. She'd seen the 3rd Shinobi World War grind through lives like they were resources. She'd been asked to heal, to save, to fix, and sometimes bodies just couldn't be fixed. But her response to take all that skill and knowledge and bury it under alcohol and gambling meant people died who could have been saved. Konoha's medical system during her absence was competent but not revolutionary. Tsunade had created new medical ninja protocols, new training standards, new approaches to battlefield medicine. All of that stagnated while she ran from her grief. The Sanin's individual failures compounded each other. Orochimaru's defection meant Konoha lost one of its most powerful defenders. Tsunade's absence meant the village had no one to fill the hole left by Orochimaru's medical expertise. Jiraiya spent so much time hunting Orochimaru and gathering intelligence on Akatsuki that he was rarely in Konoha to actually help defend it. The 3 people who should have been the village's greatest assets became 3 separate crises the village had to navigate around, and their students inherited those failures. Anko survived Orochimaru's experiments but carried his cursed seal and his betrayal. Kabuto spent years as Orochimaru's right hand, eventually starting a war as a deluded attempt to prove himself. Sasuke sought Orochimaru's power to kill Itachi, absorbed Orochimaru's abilities, and nearly destroyed everything Naruto cared about. The curse of Orochimaru's teaching was that he gave people power while encouraging their worst impulses. Jiraiya's students fared better, but still struggled with abandonment. Minato died young, unable to raise his own son, perpetuating the cycle of absent fathers. Nagato became Pain, the Akatsuki leader whose attack on Konoha killed thousands, including Jiraiya himself. Naruto grew up desperate for acknowledgement, chasing a father figure in Jiraiya, who taught him important lessons but never fully committed to being the parent Naruto needed. Tsunade's student Sakura became an exceptional medical ninja, but Tsunade trained her out of guilt over her own failures, not out of natural mentorship. Tsunade saw in Sakura someone who wanted to protect people the way Tsunade once had before trauma broke her. The mentorship was good for Sakura, but it came after Tsunade had spent decades doing nothing while people suffered. The Sanin's failures all trace back to the same source. They couldn't process loss. Orochimaru decided to defeat death through forbidden jutsu. Tsunade decided to avoid attachment altogether. Jiraiya decided to keep moving, never staying anywhere long enough to lose someone he cared about. None of them dealt with their trauma. They just found different ways to run from it, and their running created new traumas for the next generation. But here's the cruel irony. The Sannin eventually did what they were supposed to do, just decades too late. Orochimaru helped end the Fourth Shinobi World War by resurrecting the previous Hokage to fight alongside the Allied forces. Tsunade became Fifth Hokage and helped save countless lives during Pain's assault and the war. Jiraiya died getting intelligence about Pain that proved essential to defeating him. They came through when it mattered most. It just cost them their lives, their relationships, and years of preventable suffering. The mentor-student cycle in Naruto is about inherited trauma. Hiruzen, taught the Sannin but couldn't stop Orochimaru, who taught Anko and Sasuke, who carried his darkness forward. Jiraiya taught Minato, who taught Kakashi, who taught Naruto and Sasuke, each generation processing the previous generation's failures. Tsunade taught Sakura to be the medical ninja Tsunade couldn't be for Dan. The story keeps repeating: talented teacher, traumatized student, new crisis, eventual redemption, and then the cycle starts again. The difference between the Sannin and the generation they trained is that their students learned to stay. Naruto didn't abandon Konoha the way Jiraiya did. Sakura didn't run from blood the way Tsunade did. Even Sasuke eventually came back, refusing to repeat Orochimaru's permanent defection. The next generation broke the cycle not by being more talented or more powerful, but by choosing commitment over self-preservation. That's what makes the Sannin story tragic rather than just infuriating. They were talented enough to save the world and broken enough to nearly destroy it. They were loved by their students even as those students suffered from their absence. They represent the generation that survived their wars but couldn't survive their grief. Konoha's legendary heroes were also its greatest failures, and the village spent decades paying the price for the difference. The Sannin broke Konoha by failing the next generation, and Naruto's childhood shows what that failure looks like when it lands on a single defenseless kid. And real quick, don't forget to subscribe. It's free and helps us keep improving these videos. Now let's get back into it. Section 6. Naruto's childhood, isolation in plain sight. Naruto. Uzumaki grew up hated by everyone in his village for something he didn't do, couldn't control, and didn't even understand. The fourth Hokage sealed the Nine Tails inside his newborn son to save Konoha, then died hoping the village would see Naruto as a hero. Instead, they saw him as the demon that killed their loved ones. Naruto spent his childhood as Konoha's most despised resident, a walking reminder of the worst day in the village's history. He was isolated, targeted, and rejected by nearly every adult he encountered. The few people who should have protected him either failed completely or did the bare minimum while patting themselves on the back for their compassion. Hiruzen Sarutobi made it illegal to speak about Naruto being the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. On paper, this protected Naruto from enemy villages learning about the weapon Konoha possessed. In practice, it meant that an entire generation of children grew up hating Naruto without understanding why. Their parents glared at him, refused him service, chased him away from their businesses, and the kids absorbed that hatred without context. They bullied Naruto because that's what their parents' behavior taught them to do. The law didn't protect Naruto from hatred. It just made the hatred irrational and impossible to address. Hiruzen's protection was performative. He'd occasionally visit Naruto, give him some grandfatherly wisdom, maybe share a meal. These moments were meant to show that the Hokage cared about the village's Jinchuriki, but Hiruzen never stayed. He never actually raised Naruto or gave him a stable home environment. He never punished adults who abused a child in their care. Naruto lived alone in a terrible apartment, survived on ramen and expired milk, and had no one to teach him basic life skills or how to process his emotions. Hiruzen knew this, he allowed it, because actually parenting Naruto would have required work, and Hiruzen's specialty was noble-sounding speeches, not follow-through. The village's treatment of Naruto was cruel in ways that went beyond active hatred. Shopkeepers charged him inflated prices or refused to serve him entirely. Adults would pull their children away when Naruto approached, teaching them that this boy was dangerous, dirty, something to avoid. Other children threw rocks at him and called him a monster. Teachers at the academy ignored him or treated him as a problem student destined to fail. Naruto couldn't understand why everyone hated him. He just knew that he was alone, and that loneliness was a constant ache that never went away. Naruto's response to this isolation was to act out. He pulled pranks, defaced the Hokage monument, used flashy jutsu to get attention. Any attention was better than being invisible. Any reaction, even anger, proved that people saw him as something other than a monster to avoid. Iruka, Naruto's instructor at the academy, initially struggled with teaching him because Iruka's parents had been killed by the Nine Tails. Iruka saw Naruto and remembered the beast that destroyed his family, but Iruka also recognized the pattern because he'd lived it himself. Iruka had been an orphan too. After his parents died in the Nine Tails attack, Iruka became a prankster, desperate for acknowledgement from villagers who looked at him with pity. The third Hokage had been there for Iruka during his darkest moments, giving him guidance and a sense of purpose. Iruka became a teacher because he wanted to pass on the will of fire, to help the next generation avoid the loneliness he'd experienced. When Naruto became his student, Iruka saw the same desperate need for acknowledgement, the same pain of being overlooked, the same loneliness that had driven Iruka's own childhood behavior. What made Iruka different from everyone else in Naruto's life was that Iruka chose to stay. He didn't just give Naruto a lecture and disappear like Hiruzen did. He spent time with Naruto, took him to Ramen Ichiraku, listened to his dreams of becoming Hokage, and treated those dreams with respect instead of dismissing them as the fantasies of a problem child. Iruka was often strict with Naruto, punishing him for pranks and making him work to earn passing grades, but that strictness came from a place of genuine care. Iruka wanted Naruto to succeed, and he stayed in Naruto's life consistently enough for Naruto to understand that. The turning point came when Mizuki, another academy instructor, manipulated Naruto into stealing the Scroll of Seals by telling him it was a secret test to graduate early. Iruka tracked Naruto down, and Mizuki revealed the truth that the village had kept hidden. Naruto was the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. Mizuki told Naruto that everyone hated him because he was the monster that killed their families. This was the moment that could have broken Naruto completely. Learning that the hatred wasn't random, that there was a reason everyone despised him, that he carried inside him the beast that had destroyed so many lives, it should have crushed him. Instead, Iruka protected him. When Mizuki attacked Naruto with a giant shuriken, Iruka threw himself in the way, taking the weapon in his back. Iruka's words to Mizuki became the foundation for everything Naruto would later become. Naruto is different from the Nine Tails. He's one of my excellent students. He already knows what it is to feel pain inside your heart. He isn't the monster fox. He's a member of Konohagakure. He's Naruto Uzumaki. This was the first time anyone in the village had separated Naruto from the Nine Tails, the first time an adult had said explicitly that Naruto was a person worthy of acknowledgement and protection. Naruto responded by creating hundreds of shadow clones and beating Mizuki unconscious. Iruka, injured and exhausted, gave Naruto his own forehead protector, officially graduating him from the academy. That forehead protector became Naruto's most precious possession because it represented someone believing in him, not believing in the Nine Tails as a weapon, not believing in Naruto as the fourth Hokage's legacy, but believing in Naruto Uzumaki as an individual with value. The psychological damage from Naruto's childhood was severe and long-lasting. His desperate need for acknowledgement drove nearly every decision he made for years. He declared he'd become Hokage because that would force everyone to recognize him. He pulled dangerous stunts to prove himself. He refused to give up on Sasuke Uchiha, even when it became clear that Sasuke didn't want to be saved, because Naruto couldn't process the idea of abandoning someone who'd once acknowledged him as a rival and friend. Naruto's entire personality, his loudness, his determination, his refusal to give up was built on the foundation of a childhood spent being told he was worthless. What makes Naruto's story remarkable is not that he survived this treatment. Plenty of Jinchuriki survived, Gaara survived, and became a psychopath who murdered people for looking at him wrong. What makes Naruto remarkable is that he somehow didn't become bitter. He didn't decide that Konoha deserved to be destroyed for how they treated him. He didn't embrace the Nine Tails hatred. He internalized the idea that he needed to prove himself, sure, but he also internalized the idea that he could change people's minds by showing them who he really was. That resilience came from Iruka. One person treating Naruto like a human being was enough to prevent Naruto from completely losing faith in humanity. Iruka took Naruto to Ramen, listened to his problems, showed up for him consistently, and demonstrated that someone in this village gave a damn whether Naruto lived or died. When Jiraiya later died fighting pain, Naruto broke down, and Iruka was the one who found him and reminded him that Jiraiya had been proud of him, had seen him as a grandson, had believed Naruto would change the world. Iruka was the constant. Jiraiya trained Naruto and then left. Hiruzen gave speeches and then went back to running the village. Iruka stayed. But here's the darker truth. One good teacher shouldn't have been enough. Naruto should have had a support system. He should have had the Hokage personally ensuring his safety and well-being. He should have had adults in the village standing up for him when shopkeepers abused him. He should have had friends, mentors, family. Instead, he had Iruka. And then later he scraped together a chosen family from the few people who bothered to see past the Nine Tails. The bar for being a good person in Naruto's life was so low that didn't actively abuse the traumatized orphan child counted as exceptional kindness. The third Hokage gets credit for keeping Naruto alive and in the village. That's it. That's the extent of what Hiruzen accomplished. He didn't protect Naruto from systemic abuse. He didn't address the village's hatred or challenge their treatment of an innocent child. He made a law that prevented people from talking about why they hated Naruto, which helped Konoha's strategic position but did nothing to improve Naruto's actual life. Hiruzen felt guilty about this. He knew he'd failed Naruto. His occasional visits to Naruto's apartment were his way of easing that guilt without actually fixing the problem. The village's failure toward Naruto is even worse when you realize they knew he was Minato's son. Hiruzen knew. Some of the senior ninja knew. Jiraiya knew. Minato had been a beloved hero, and Kushina had been respected despite being a Jinchuriki herself. Their son should have been treasured, protected, raised with care. Instead, those who knew the truth kept it secret, and those who didn't know treated Naruto like garbage. The village failed the fourth Hokage's last wish spectacularly. Minato wanted Naruto to be seen as a hero. Naruto became the village's punching bag instead. What saved Naruto wasn't the village's systems or leadership, it was luck. He happened to get Iruka as a teacher. He happened to encounter Mizuki's betrayal in a way that forced Iruka to choose a side. He happened to get placed on Team 7 with Kakashi, who had his own trauma but eventually became a decent mentor. He happened to train with Jiraiya, who taught him valuable skills even if he couldn't commit to being a proper father figure. Every good thing in Naruto's life came from chance encounters and individual people choosing to care about him despite the village's collective hatred. The long-term effects of Naruto's childhood shaped his entire approach to being Hokage. He understood what it felt like to be an outsider, which made him advocate for people others had given up on. He knew what it was like to be judged for circumstances beyond his control, which made him willing to forgive enemies who'd been shaped by their own trauma and give them chances at redemption. He remembered what it felt like to be alone, which made him value bonds with others above almost everything else. Naruto's greatest strengths as a leader came from his worst experiences as a child, but those strengths came at a cost. Naruto's need for acknowledgement never fully went away. Even as Hokage, he overworked himself trying to prove his worth. He neglected his own family in pursuit of being the perfect leader for everyone else. He struggled to say no to anyone who needed help because he remembered how it felt when no one helped him. His childhood taught him to be selfless to the point of self-destruction, and while that made him a hero, it also meant he never fully learned to prioritize his own well-being. Naruto's relationship with Iruka remained the most important one in his life. When Naruto married Hinata, he asked Iruka to stand in as his father, not Jiraiya's memory, not Hiruzen's legacy. Iruka, the academy instructor who'd taken a shuriken in the back for him, who'd given him his forehead protector, who'd shown up consistently for him when no one else would. That choice speaks to what Naruto really needed as a child, not a powerful mentor who could teach him advanced jutsu, not a legendary ninja with a prophecy about the world's savior, just someone who saw him as Naruto Uzumaki, who treated him like a person instead of a weapon or a burden or a monster, and who stayed. The tragedy of Naruto's childhood is that it was preventable. He didn't need to grow up hated and alone. The village could have honored Minato's sacrifice by caring for his son. Hiruzen could have actually protected him instead of making token gestures. The adults in Konoha could have been better. They chose not to be. They chose comfort over compassion, tradition over justice, their own grief over the well-being of an innocent child. Naruto survived that childhood and became a hero anyway, but he shouldn't have had to. The fact that he did, that he maintained his humanity despite everything the village did to crush it, says more about Iruka's influence and Naruto's own resilience than it does about Konoha's systems or values. Naruto's story is often framed as inspirational, the underdog who overcame hatred to become the greatest ninja of his generation. But strip away the inspirational framing, and it's the story of a village that abused a child for 12 years, and that child somehow deciding the village was still worth protecting. That's not a triumph of Konoha's values, that's a failure of Konoha's leadership, redeemed only by one Chunin instructor who decided that maybe, just maybe, the kid everyone hated deserved a chance. Naruto survived Konoha's cruelty by pure chance, and the Chunin exams proved that the same negligence nearly got the entire village destroyed. Before we move on, go ahead and hit subscribe, totally free, and it really helps us keep this going. Alright, let's continue. Section 7. The Chunin exams in Orochimaru's invasion. The Chunin exams were supposed to demonstrate Konoha's strength to the other villages. Instead, they revealed how vulnerable the village had become, how deeply enemy forces had infiltrated its systems, and how unprepared its leadership was for the threats it faced. What started as a multinational competition to promote promising genin ended with Konoha in ruins, the third Hokage dead, and the village so weakened that a team of genin was the best force they could send to retrieve Sasuke Uchiha when he defected months later. The Chunin exams and the invasion that followed weren't just a military defeat. They were proof that Konoha's systems had failed at every level. Orochimaru's plan was elegant in its simplicity. He'd murdered the fourth Kazekage of Tsunagakure and impersonated him, convincing Suna to join forces with Otogakure in a joint invasion of Konoha. The attack would use the Chunin exams as cover, with Suna's Jinchuriki Gaara releasing his tailed beast Shukaku in the center of the village while Suna and Oto forces broke through Konoha's walls. Orochimaru's personal goal was to kill his former teacher Hiruzen Sarutobi, settling old grudges while crippling Konoha's leadership. The plan worked almost perfectly because Konoha's defenses were designed to stop external attacks, not internal betrayal coordinated with a trusted ally. The warning signs were everywhere. Orochimaru had infiltrated the Forest of Death during the second exam, attacked Team 7, and branded Sasuke with a cursed seal. Anko Mitarashi, Orochimaru's former student, recognized his techniques and tried to warn Hiruzen. The village suspected an attack was coming and prepared accordingly, but they never identified who would be attacking or when, which meant their preparations were scattered and reactive rather than focused. When Kabuto Yakushi cast a genjutsu that put most of the stadium audience to sleep during the finals, signaling the invasion's start, Konoha's forces were caught off guard despite having anticipated trouble. Orochimaru's infiltration was successful because he'd spent years building Otogakure specifically to hurt Konoha. He'd recruited talented shinobi from various villages, developed cursed seals to enhance their power, and established hidden bases throughout the continent. His Sound Four were powerful enough to erect a barrier that prevented Konoha's forces from interfering. With his fight against Hiruzen, his summons giant snakes that could tear through buildings rampaged through the village, while his forces eliminated border guards and punched holes in Konoha's defenses. The early stages of the invasion went overwhelmingly in the attackers' favor because Orochimaru understood Konoha's weaknesses better than Konoha's own leadership did. Gaara's role in the invasion revealed another systemic failure, this time in Sunagakure. Gaara was Suna's ultimate weapon, a Jinchuriki raised in isolation and trained to become a killing machine. His father, the fourth Kazekage, had attempted to assassinate him multiple times to test his suitability as a weapon, each attempt failing but further traumatizing Gaara. By the time Gaara arrived in Konoha for the Chunin exams, he was a barely controlled psychopath who killed for the sake of affirming his own existence. Suna's plan relied on Gaara maintaining enough control to release Shukaku at the right moment. They'd created a weapon they couldn't fully control, and then built a military strategy around that weapon working perfectly. Gaara's fight with Sasuke during the finals demonstrated what happens when a traumatized child is given immense power and no emotional support. Gaara's sand automatically protected him from all harm, meaning he'd never experienced real pain. When Sasuke's Chidori pierced his sand and injured him for the first time, Gaara completely lost control. He saw his own blood and screamed, canceling his transformation into Shukaku. The invasion plan required Gaara to be mentally stable enough to follow orders. He wasn't. Baki ordered Temari and Kankuro to retreat with Gaara, and Sasuke pursued them, forcing a confrontation outside the village that had nothing to do with Suna's strategic objectives and everything to do with Gaara's psychological breakdown. Naruto's fight with Gaara became the turning point, not just for the invasion, but for both their lives. Gaara, fully transformed into Shukaku, tried to kill Naruto with overwhelming force. Naruto responded by summoning Gamabunta and fighting back with everything he had. What made the fight significant wasn't the combat itself, but what Naruto said afterward. When Gaara demanded to know how Naruto could be so strong despite being a Jinchuriki like him, Naruto explained that his strength came from protecting his friends. Gaara had spent his entire life alone, believing that only by killing others could he prove he existed. Naruto had also been alone and hated, but he'd found people who acknowledged him and he would do anything to protect them. That conversation saved Gaara's life in more ways than one. Gaara realized his approach to existence was wrong. He'd surrendered to his circumstances too easily. Naruto proved that being a Jinchuriki didn't mean being a monster, that loneliness didn't have to lead to murder, that there was another way to live. Gaara apologized to his siblings as they carried him away from Konoha the first time he'd shown remorse for anything. Naruto's victory over Gaara wasn't about proving Konoha's strength, it was about proving that trauma doesn't have to define you, that you can choose a different path even after years of pain. Meanwhile, in the village, Orochimaru was killing his former teacher. The fight between Orochimaru and Hiruzen showcased both Hiruzen's strength and his fatal sentimentality. Orochimaru used impure world reincarnation to summon the first and second Hokage to fight alongside him. Hiruzen, despite his age and despite being outnumbered, held his own, but Orochimaru had planned for this. He'd taken a new host body after his encounter with Itachi damaged his previous one. He'd studied Hiruzen's techniques and weaknesses. He was prepared to kill his former teacher, and Hiruzen was prepared to die stopping him. Hiruzen's use of the dead demon-consuming seal was both his greatest act of service to the village and his greatest failure. He sealed the first and second Hokage's souls, preventing Orochimaru from using them further. But when Hiruzen tried to seal Orochimaru's soul, Orochimaru stabbed him through the back with his sword of Kusanagi. Weakened and dying, Hiruzen could only seal Orochimaru's arms, robbing him of the ability to use jutsu requiring hand seals, but leaving him alive. Orochimaru escaped with the Sound Four's help, and Hiruzen died having failed to fully stop the threat he'd allowed to grow by not executing Orochimaru years earlier when he had the chance. The third Hokage's death marked the end of an era. Hiruzen's had been the face of Konoha's leadership for decades, serving as Hokage twice and training the legendary Sannin. His death left a power vacuum that the village couldn't immediately fill. Jiraiya was offered the position of 5th Hokage and refused, recommending Tsunade instead. But finding Tsunade and convincing her to return took time, and during that time Konoha was vulnerable, understaffed, and struggling to recover from the invasion's damage. The casualties from the invasion were severe. Hundreds of ninja and civilians died. Infrastructure was destroyed. The 3rd Hokage's funeral was attended by the entire village, everyone mourning not just a leader but the symbol of stability he'd represented. The village's fighting forces were cut in half, meaning surviving ninja had to take on more missions than usual, and missions of higher rank than they were trained for. When Sasuke defected to Orochimaru, the best team Konoha could send after him was led by Shikamaru Nara, a newly promoted Chunin with a squad of Genin. That's how depleted Konoha's forces had become. Tsunagakure realized they'd been manipulated when they discovered the 4th Kazakege's corpse. Orochimaru had used them, exploiting Suna's financial struggles and desperation to make them complicit in an attack on an allied village. Suna immediately surrendered to Konoha, offered apologies, and formed a peace treaty. They would thereafter come to Konoha's aid whenever needed, a relationship that proved valuable when Sasuke defected and when Gaara was later kidnapped by Akatsuki. But the damage was done. The invasion had cost both villages dearly, and the primary beneficiary was Orochimaru, who'd accomplished his goal of killing Hiruzen and weakening Konoha. The invasion exposed how fragile Konoha's security really was. Orochimaru had infiltrated the village disguised as a grass genin named Shiore, killed the real Shiore and her team, and operated freely in the Forest of Death. Kabuto had been working as a Konoha genin for years, gathering intelligence and preparing for the invasion. Sound Ninja had infiltrated the stadium audience. The 4th Kazakege's impersonation had gone undetected until it was too late. Every layer of Konoha's security had failed because the village's systems assumed threats would come from outside, not from trusted allies or from within. The psychological impact of the invasion was significant. The villagers had believed Konoha was safe, protected by powerful ninja and wise leadership. The invasion shattered that illusion. People had died in their homes in the streets watching their village burn. Children like Konohamaru watched Hiruzen's memorial crack during the invasion and attended his funeral days later. Learning that even the Hokage wasn't invincible, the sense of safety that Hiruzen's long tenure had provided was gone, replaced by awareness that the village was vulnerable and that future attacks were inevitable. Gaara's story became a dark mirror of what Naruto could have been. Both were Jinchuriki hated by their villages. Both grew up isolated and desperate for acknowledgement. The difference was that Gaara had no Iruka, no one who looked at him and saw a person instead of a weapon. Yashimaru's betrayal, Gaara's uncle attempting to kill him on orders from Gaara's father and lying that he'd always hated Gaara, broke something fundamental in Gaara's psyche. He carved the kanji for love into his forehead and decided to love only himself, to kill anyone who threatened his existence. That's what Naruto could have become if even one more person had rejected him, if Iruka hadn't protected him, if Hiruzen's minimal interventions had been even less involved. The invasion also revealed the limits of Konoha's alliances. Tsunagakure had been suffering budget cuts from the Wind Daimyo, leading to missions being redirected to Konoha. Rather than helping their ally navigate these difficulties, Konoha benefited from Suna's weakness. When Orochimaru offered Suna a chance to strike back, they took it. The alliance between the villages was transactional rather than genuine, maintained through convenience rather than trust. The invasion forced both villages to recognize that their relationship needed to be rebuilt on better foundations. Hiruzen's death meant that his failures would never be properly addressed, that he'd let Orochimaru escape. He'd allowed Danzo's route to operate in secret. He'd failed to protect Naruto from systemic abuse. He had been too sentimental to make hard decisions about threats to the village. His students all scattered after his death. Jiraiya refused the Hokage position, Tsunade had to be convinced to return, and Orochimaru was the one who killed him. The generation that should have protected Konoha had instead contributed to its near destruction, and Hiruzen's death meant he'd never face real accountability for enabling that. The invasion's most lasting impact was demonstrating that Konoha's era of stability was over. The village had coasted on the reputations of the first and fourth Hokage, on Hiruzen's long tenure, on being one of the 5 great nations. The invasion proved that reputation wasn't enough. Other villages were willing to attack. Enemy ninja could infiltrate their systems. Their leadership could be killed. The next generation, Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, Shikamaru, and the others would have to be stronger, smarter, and more vigilant than their predecessors because the threats facing them were already inside the village walls. The Chunin exams were meant to showcase Konoha's strength. Instead, they revealed a village built on complacency, led by people who prioritized sentiment over security, protected by systems designed for a world that no longer existed. Hundreds died because Hiruzen couldn't kill his former student years earlier. The village was nearly destroyed because no one questioned why the 4th Kazekage was acting strangely. An entire generation of ninja was traumatized because their leaders failed to protect them. Konoha survived the invasion, but barely, and the cost of that survival would shape everything that came after. The invasion exposed how broken Konoha's leadership really was, and the Hyuga clan proves that some of its worst crimes weren't hidden at all, just officially tolerated. Section 8, the Hyuga clan's dark secret. The Hyuga clan was known throughout the shinobi world as one of Konoha's most prestigious families, renowned for the Byakugan and their mastery of the gentle fist style. They were considered, alongside the Uchiha, to be among the village's strongest clans, but beneath this reputation of excellence lay a system so cruel and archaic that it belonged to the feudal era, not a modern hidden village. The Hyuga maintained a caste system that branded children with curse seals, gave one half of the family absolute control over the other, and enforced this hierarchy through the threat of excruciating pain or death. This wasn't ancient history. This was happening in Konoha under the watch of every Hokage who'd ever led the village, and nobody stopped it. The Hyuga clan was divided into two houses, the main house and the branch house. The main house consisted of the clan head's direct line, the family meant to lead and preserve the clan's bloodline. The branch house consisted of everyone else, siblings born even seconds later, cousins, relatives who existed solely to serve and protect the main house. On the third birthday of the main house heir, every branch house member received a curse seal branded onto their forehead. This seal gave main house members the ability to destroy branch house members' brain cells with a simple hand gesture, causing unbearable pain or outright death. The seal also ensured that when a branch house member died, their Byakugan would be sealed away, protecting the clan's secrets from outsiders who might steal their eyes. The system was justified as necessary to protect the Byakugan from being stolen by enemy villages. Kumogakure had repeatedly attempted to acquire the Hyuga's Kekkei Genkai, and the curse seal prevented those attempts from succeeding even if they managed to kill a Hyuga and take their eyes. But the protection of the Byakugan came at the cost of the branch house members' humanity. They weren't just servants, they were slaves, bound from childhood to obey the main house under threat of torture. And because the curse seal was placed on them when they were 3 years old, they grew up knowing their entire lives were predetermined by an accident of birth order. Neji Hyuga's story illustrated how fundamentally unjust this system was. Neji was born to Hizashi Hyuga, twin brother of Hiashi Hyuga, the clan head. Hizashi was born mere seconds after Hiashi, and that tiny difference determined everything. Hiashi became the head of the main house. Hizashi was branded with the curse seal and relegated to the branch house. When Neji was born, he inherited his father's fate automatically. On Hinata's third birthday, Hinata being Hiashi's daughter and the clan heir, Neji received his curse seal. He was 3 years old and already marked as inferior, his forehead branded to show everyone that he existed to serve. What made Neji's situation worse was that he was a prodigy, someone whose natural talent surpassed even main house members. His father recognized this early and resented that Neji would never be allowed to reach his full potential. Hizashi's anger at the system would manifest subconsciously, and when Hiashi sensed this killing intent from his brother, he would activate Hizashi's curse seal as punishment. Neji witnessed his father being tortured for having feelings, for daring to be angry that his son's life was being wasted. This taught Neji that the main house could hurt branch house members whenever they wanted, that there was no recourse, no justice, no way out. The Hyuga affair made everything worse. When Hinata was nearly kidnapped by a Kumogakure head ninja who wanted to steal the Byakugan, Hiashi killed the attacker to save his daughter. Kumo, rather than admit their head ninja had attempted kidnapping during a supposed peace mission, claimed Hiashi's actions were a declaration of war. They demanded Hiashi's body as compensation, knowing that getting his corpse would give them access to the Byakugan they'd failed to steal. Konoha's leadership and the Hyuga elders decided that Hizashi would die in Hiashi's place, using him as a body double since his curse seal would destroy his Byakugan upon death. Hizashi volunteered for this, but not because he wanted to preserve the Hyuga's feudal system. He did it to save his brother's life, to prevent war, and most importantly, to choose his own fate for the first time in his life. Every other decision had been made for him. His position in the branch house, the curse seal on his forehead, his role as Hayashi's servant. This one time he got to decide. He told Hayashi to explain this to Neji, to make sure Neji understood that Hizashi chose to die protecting his brother, his family, and his village. But Hiashi didn't tell Neji the truth. He kept it secret, believing Neji wasn't ready to hear it. So Neji grew up thinking his father had been sacrificed by the main house, forced to die to protect people who saw him as disposable. Neji's rage was justified. He believed he was fated to be a failure because the branch house system ensured he would always serve the main house regardless of his talent. He saw his father's death as proof that the branch house existed to die for the main house's benefit. He became bitter, cold, and fatalistic, convinced that destiny was inescapable, and that trying to fight it only brought more pain. When he fought Hinata during the Chunin exams, he told her she was weak, that she should give up on being a ninja, that people couldn't change their fundamental nature. He nearly killed her because she represented everything he hated about the main house. People born into privilege who squandered their advantages while people like him were denied opportunities despite their talent. Naruto defeated Neji by proving that destiny wasn't fixed, that people could change if they refused to give up. Hiashi finally told Neji the truth about Hisashi's death, explaining that Hisashi chose to die and that his final request was for Hiashi to tell Neji this. Hiashi bowed to Neji and begged forgiveness for not telling him sooner. This gesture, a main house member bowing to a branch house member, meant everything to Neji. It acknowledged that the system was wrong, that Neji had been wronged, and that Hisashi's choice mattered. Neji started to believe that he could choose his own destiny, that he didn't have to be defined by the curse seal on his forehead. But here's what nobody addressed. The curse seal system continued. Neji's change of heart didn't free him from the branch house. The main house still had the ability to torture or kill him whenever they wanted. The system that had destroyed his father and traumatized him as a child remained in place because it was necessary to protect the Byakugan. Neji reconciled with Hiashi and started training with the main house, but the fundamental injustice of the system wasn't fixed. It was just ignored because Neji personally decided to stop being angry about it. The persistence of this system in Konoha revealed how deeply the village's leadership had failed. The Hyuga curse seal system was slavery with a justification. Branch house members had no choice in their servitude, no ability to leave, no legal recourse against abuse. They could be tortured at will by main house members, and the only thing preventing constant abuse was the main house's personal restraint. This wasn't a partnership or a security measure. It was one group of people owning another group of people, and Konoha allowed it because the Hyuga were powerful and prestigious. Every Hokage knew about this system. Hiruzen certainly knew. He'd been involved in the Hyuga affair and had approved using Hisashi as a sacrifice. The village's leadership understood that the Hyuga were branding children with curse seals that could kill them, and they did nothing because the Hyuga's power was valuable to Konoha. The village that claimed to protect its citizens, that talked about the will of fire and the importance of every person's life, permitted a noble clan to enslave half its members. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The system persisted because it benefited the people in power. The main house wanted to maintain control over the branch house, both to protect the Byakugan and to preserve their own status. The branch house had no leverage to change the system because the curse seals ensured they couldn't rebel. Konoha's leadership benefited from having a powerful clan loyal to the village, and challenging the Hyuga's internal structure might have cost them that loyalty. So the curse seal system continued generation after generation, because changing it would require the people who benefited from it to voluntarily give up power. Hinata's position in all this was complicated. As the heir to the main house, she was supposed to embody everything the system valued: strength, leadership, the ability to command the branch house. But Hinata was kind, gentle, and fundamentally uncomfortable with the idea of having power over others. Her father deemed her unsuited to be the clan heir because she struggled in training and lacked the ruthless edge he believed a leader needed. When her younger sister Hanabi showed more talent and aggression, Hiashi essentially disinherited Hinata, though she remained technically part of the main house. Hinata's struggle between tradition and change manifested in her relationship with Neji. She called him brother, despite him technically being her cousin, a term of endearment that ignored the main house-branch house divide. She was horrified when Neji nearly killed her during their fight, not because he attacked her, but because she recognized his pain and understood why he hated the main house. She admired Naruto's refusal to accept that fate was predetermined, and she adopted that philosophy herself, trying to prove she could change even if her father didn't believe in her. During the Fourth Shinobi World War, Neji died protecting Hinata from the Ten Tails attack. His last words were about finally understanding what his father felt when Hisashi chose to die for his brother, the freedom of choosing to protect someone you love. Neji's death was framed as redemptive, as proof that he'd overcome his bitterness and embraced the bonds between the main and branch houses, but it was also deeply ironic. Neji died fulfilling the branch house's role of protecting the main house, the exact fate he'd spent years raging against. He chose to die for Hinata, sure, but the choice was shaped by a lifetime of being told that his purpose was to serve and protect the main house. After Neji's death, did the Hyuga abolish the curse seal system? There's no indication they did. Hiashi remained clan head. The main branch house structure continued. Neji's sacrifice was honored, but the system that had determined his fate from age 3 remained in place because protecting the Baikugan was still considered more important than the freedom and dignity of branch house members. The Hyuga clan learned nothing from Neji's story except that sometimes branch house members would voluntarily fulfill their designated role. The curse seal system was a stain on Konoha's claim to be a just society. It was feudalism hiding behind security concerns, slavery justified by protecting a valuable bloodline limit. The branch house members were people, children branded and enslaved because of birth order, talented ninja whose potential was limited by a system that saw them as disposable, human beings tortured or killed at the whim of their supposed family. And Konoha allowed it generation after generation because challenging powerful clans was politically inconvenient and because the village's leadership valued strength over justice. Neji's story should have ended with the abolition of the curse seal system. His talent, his pain, his father's sacrifice, his eventual reconciliation with Hiashi, all of it pointed toward the fundamental injustice of judging people by birth rather than ability. But instead, Neji died protecting the main house, and the system that had oppressed him continued. The Hyuga's dark secret wasn't that they had a curse seal system, it was that everyone knew about it, everyone understood how cruel it was, and nobody with the power to stop it ever tried. That's the real failure, not that the system existed, but that Konoha decided it was acceptable. Konoha tolerated slavery inside one of its greatest clans, and Tsunade's rise asked whether the village was finally ready to confront its rot or just patch the wounds and move on. While we're at it, consider subscribing. It costs nothing and supports everything we're building here. Now, back to the next part. Section 9. Tsunade's leadership, healing old wounds. Tsunade Senju returned to Konohagakure decades after leaving it, dragged back from a life of gambling and drinking, to become the 5th Hokage of a village she'd once abandoned. She was a living legend who'd spent years trying to forget she was legendary, a medical genius who couldn't stand the sight of blood, and a woman so convinced that dreaming was futile that she'd given up on everything her loved ones had died fighting for. Her appointment as Hokage wasn't a triumphant return, it was a last resort. Konoha was broken after Orochimaru's invasion, Hiruzen was dead, and Jiraiya had refused the position. Tsunade was the best option they had left, which said more about Konoha's desperation than it did about her qualifications. Tsunade had left Konoha during the Third Shinobi World War after her lover Dan Kato died in her arms from blood loss she couldn't stop. This trauma, combined with the earlier death of her younger brother Nawaki, left her with hemophobia so severe that she couldn't practice medicine or engage in combat. She took her student Shizune, Dan's niece, and spent decades wandering, gambling compulsively, drinking heavily, and avoiding anything that reminded her of the village where everyone she loved had died. She became known as the legendary Sucker for her notoriously bad luck at gambling, racking up massive debts that she'd skip town to avoid paying. This was the woman they asked to lead Konoha, someone who'd given up on the village, on medicine, and on the idea that anyone's dreams were worth pursuing. Naruto Uzumaki changed her mind. When Jiraiya and Naruto found Tsunade to offer her the Hokage position, she refused, calling it a fool's job and insulting every Hokage who'd held the title. She believed that pursuing dreams only led to death and that the Hokage position had killed her grandfather Hashirama, her great-uncle Tobirama, and her teacher Hiruzen. Naruto, who had his own dreams of becoming Hokage, was enraged and challenged her to a fight. She easily defeated him, but she was unsettled by how similar his determination was to Nawaki's and Dan's. When Naruto vowed to master the Rasengan in a week, despite her insistence that he lacked the talent, she made a bet with him. If he succeeded, she'd give him Hashirama's necklace. If he failed, she'd take his wallet. Orochimaru complicated everything by offering to revive Nawaki and Dan using impure world reincarnation in exchange for healing his arms. Tsunade was tempted, desperately, painfully tempted by the chance to see her loved ones again. But when Naruto mastered the Rasengan despite the odds, proving that dreams weren't impossible just because they seemed that way, and when he reminded her through his actions that Nawaki and Dan wouldn't want to be brought back at the cost of Konoha's safety, Tsunade made her choice. She attacked Orochimaru instead of healing him, overcame her hemophobia to protect Naruto, and accepted the position of 5th Hokage. She kissed Naruto's forehead the same way she'd once kissed Nawaki's and Dan's, placing her faith in his dream even though the last 2 times she'd done that, those men had died. Taking office meant confronting everything she'd been running from for decades. The village was devastated from Orochimaru's invasion. Hundreds of ninja and civilians had died. Infrastructure was destroyed. The 3rd Hokage was gone, leaving a power vacuum and a massive workload that Tsunade, despite being a legendary ninja, had no administrative experience handling. Konoha was so understaffed that when Sasuke Uchiha defected to Orochimaru shortly after Tsunade became Hokage, the best team she could send after him was led by Shikamaru Nara, a newly promoted Chunin, with a squad of Genin. That's how depleted the village's forces were. One invasion had reduced Konoha to sending children on missions that should have required Jonin-level operatives. Tsunade immediately began rebuilding Konoha's systems, particularly its medical infrastructure. She'd spent the Second Shinobi World War advocating for medical enin to be included on all 4-man squads to reduce casualties, an idea Hiruzen had agreed with but never fully implemented due to resource constraints. Now, as Hokage, Tsunade had the authority to make it happen. She established modern protocols for medical enin, created training programs, and set up systems that would save countless lives in the years to come. She also exempted herself from many of the laws governing medical nin because her creation rebirth technique allowed her to heal any wound instantly, though at the cost of shortening her lifespan with each use. Tsunade's medical expertise made her invaluable in ways that went beyond administration. She healed Kakashi and Sasuke from the psychological damage of Itachi's Tsukuyomi. She fixed Rock Lee's spine after he was told by other medical nin that he'd never fight again, though she was honest about the 50% chance he wouldn't survive the surgery. When Lee chose to undergo the procedure anyway because being a ninja was his dream, Tsunade couldn't argue with that. She understood what it meant to chase a dream even when the odds were terrible. She studied the Nara clan medical encyclopedia to cure Choji Akemichi from the life-threatening side effects of the 3-colored pills. She constantly pushed the boundaries of what medical ninjutsu could accomplish, saving people who would have been written off as lost causes under any other Hokage. But Tsunade's leadership went beyond healing individual people. She had to navigate the complex political landscape of a village that was still recovering from betrayal and invasion while dealing with the growing threat of Akatsuki. The Konoha Council, Homura Mitokado, and Koharu Utatane, the 3rd Hokage's former teammates, constantly questioned her decisions, particularly her willingness to send Naruto on missions despite Akatsuki actively hunting Jinchuriki. They argued that Naruto should be kept in the village where he was safe. Tsunade insisted that Naruto was one of the few people she could trust absolutely, that keeping him deployed made him harder for Akatsuki to locate, and that he deserved the chance to prove himself rather than being locked away for his own protection. She eventually wore them down, though she had to promise to take personal responsibility if anything went wrong. Danzo Shimura posed a different kind of problem. Danzo operated Root in the Shadows, training child soldiers and conducting operations that Konoha's leadership either didn't know about or chose to ignore. Tsunade couldn't eliminate Root entirely. Danzo had too much influence with the council, and too many secrets that could damage the village if exposed, but she could and did limit his power where possible. When she reformed Team 7 for the Tenchi Bridge mission, the council insisted that one of Danzo's operatives, Sai, be included on the team. Tsunade agreed, but also assigned Yamato, an Anbu captain, to lead the team specifically so he could keep an eye on Sai and report back if Danzo was using the mission for his own purposes. Tsunade's relationship with the council was perpetually antagonistic. They saw her as reckless, too willing to trust young ninja with important missions, too lenient with Naruto and others who should be more strictly controlled. She saw them as cowards who lacked faith in the next generation and who prioritized safety over growth. When they questioned why she would send Naruto into situations where Akatsuki might capture him, Tsunade's response was simple. Akatsuki would come for Naruto eventually regardless of what Konoha did, so it was better to train him to defend himself than to hide him away and hope for the best. When they criticized her for letting young ninja try dangerous missions, she pointed out that preventing them from trying guaranteed they would never grow stronger. Her approach to leadership was fundamentally different from Hiruzen's. Hiruzen had been sentimental, unwilling to make hard decisions when they involved people he cared about, prone to hoping problems would resolve themselves. Tsunade was blunt, direct, and willing to make unpopular decisions if she believed they were correct. She struck Naru when he was being immature and Jiraiya when he was being perverted. She yelled at the council when they undermined her authority. She made enemies because she refused to compromise on what she thought was right, and she didn't particularly care if people liked her as long as they respected her judgment. But Tsunade wasn't just tough, she was also deeply committed to protecting the people under her care. When Pain attacked Konoha and the council argued that Naruto should remain in hiding at Mount Miyabaku, Tsunade berated them for lacking faith in Naruto's ability to protect himself and others. She went to the roof of the Hokage residence and summoned Katsuya, dividing the giant slug across the entire village so that Tsunade could heal every injured villager remotely. This technique required enormous chakra reserves and left Tsunade vulnerable, but she did it anyway because protecting her people was more important than protecting herself. During Pain's assault, Tsunade fought the Six Paths of Pain directly, vowing to defeat them personally after they destroyed most of the village. When Naruto arrived and asked her to trust Pain's defeat to him, she agreed, even though doing so meant admitting she couldn't handle the situation herself. She transferred all her chakra to Katsuyu to keep villagers alive, which caused her to revert to her true age. A frail-looking woman in her 50s who'd been using a transformation technique to appear decades younger. She fell into a coma from chakra exhaustion and remained unconscious while Naruto defeated Pain, while the village mourned Jiraiya, and while preparations for the Fourth Shinobi World War began. When she finally woke up, her first act was to demand a briefing on everything she'd missed and to immediately start planning Konoha's strategies for the war. During the Fourth Shinobi World War, Tsunade fought alongside the other Kage against Madara Uchiha. She used her creation Rebirth to heal herself from mortal wounds, punched through Madara's Susanoo with a single strike, and fought for hours despite the technique gradually shortening her lifespan with every injury she healed. When Madara bisected her with his sword, leaving her literally cut in half, she still had enough strength and willpower to summon Katsuyu and heal the other Kage before losing consciousness. She was later healed by Orochimaru's team, a bitter irony being saved by the man who'd killed Hiruzen, and she rejoined the battlefield to provide medical support for the entire allied forces alongside Sakura. Tsunade's greatest contribution to Konoha wasn't her combat prowess or her political maneuvering, it was her refusal to give up on people. She trained Sakura as her apprentice, recognizing that Sakura had something she wanted to protect and that this desire would drive her to become exceptional. She gave Naruto the necklace that had belonged to Hashirama, Nawaki, and Dan, symbolically passing on her faith in his dream, even though everyone else who'd worn that necklace had died shortly afterward. She defended Rock Lee's right to risk his life pursuing his dream of being a ninja, even when the odds of survival were terrible. She fought the council when they wanted to give up on Sasuke, insisting that Naruto believed Sasuke could be saved and that this belief deserved support rather than dismissal. Her leadership style was defined by her experiences with loss. She'd watched Nawaki die the day after she gave him Hashirama's necklace. She'd felt Dan bleed out in her arms while she desperately tried to save him. She'd spent decades convinced that dreaming was pointless because everyone she'd ever believed in had died pursuing their dreams. But Naruto had proven her wrong by refusing to accept that fate was predetermined, and Tsunade spent her time as Hokage trying to give others the same chance Naruto had given her, the opportunity to prove that dreams were worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. Tsunade wasn't a perfect Hokage. She drank too much, gambled irresponsibly with village resources, sometimes slept on the job, and tried to delegate paperwork to anyone who'd take it. She was temperamental, prone to violence when annoyed, and feared throughout the village for her tendency to punch people through walls when they irritated her. Her notoriously bad luck at gambling became a running joke, with her winning streaks treated as bad omens because they so rarely happened. She maintained her youthful appearance through a transformation technique that required constant chakra. And when she ran out of chakra, she reverted to looking like the 50-something woman she actually was, heavily wrinkled and frail-looking from decades of using creation rebirth. But despite these flaws, Tsunade was exactly what Konoha needed after Hiruzen's death. The village required someone who would make hard decisions without sentimentality, who would stand up to the council when they tried to control her, who would train the next generation properly instead of leaving them to figure things out on their own. Tsunade did all of that. She rebuilt Konoha's infrastructure, revolutionized its medical systems, fought off multiple existential threats, and prepared Naruto, Sakura, and others to eventually take over leadership of the village. She overcame her hemophobia, her cynicism about dreams, and her decades-long grief to become a Hokage who genuinely cared about her people and who would do anything to protect them. When Kakashi eventually succeeded her as 6th Hokage, Tsunade continued supporting the village in retirement, offering advice when asked, and stepping in during emergencies. She watched Naruto become 7th Hokage, the dream he'd been chasing since childhood, the dream she'd once called foolish, and she was proud of him for achieving it. She'd come full circle from a young woman who believed in dreams to someone who'd given up on them entirely, to a Hokage who fought to give others the chance to pursue their dreams, to a retired legend who got to see those dreams realized. Tsunade's story wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest or the most qualified. It was about deciding after decades of running to come home and heal the wounds, both her own and the village's, that she'd left behind. Tsunade spent years stitching Konoha back together, and Pain arrived to prove that healing wounds means nothing if you never face the crimes that caused them. Section 10. Pain's Assault. When the village faced its sins. Pain's attack on Konohagakure wasn't just an invasion, it was a reckoning. The village that had proclaimed itself a beacon of the will of fire, that had positioned itself as a protector of peace, was leveled by someone who had every reason to hate everything it represented. Nagato Uzumaki, operating through 6 corpses as Pain, came to Konoha with a simple goal: capture Naruto and force the village to understand suffering. He succeeded in both. When the smoke cleared and the rubble settled, Konoha was gone, destroyed so completely that it looked like it had never existed. Hundreds were dead, the Hokage was in a coma, and the village was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Pain's grievances against the shinobi system were justified, and Konoha had played a major role in creating the monster who destroyed it. Nagato's story began during the Second Shinobi World War. He was a child living on the outskirts of Amegakure with his parents when two Konoha shinobi broke into their home looking for food. His parents attacked to let Nagato escape, and the Konoha ninja killed them in self-defense. When they realized they'd just killed civilians, they tried apologizing to Nagato, but it was too late. With grief, Nagato, who had Madara's Rinnegan transplanted into him as an infant without his knowledge, activated those eyes for the first time and killed both shinobi. He was a child who just watched his parents die, and the ninja who killed them represented Konoha, the village that would later celebrate itself as a force for peace. Nagato became an orphan in a war-torn country where resources were scarce and nobody would help him. He met Yahiko and Konan, fellow orphans, and they banded together to survive. They dreamed of a world where they would have power and could use it to eliminate war. To accomplish this, they needed to become ninja, so they approached the legendary Sannin and asked to be trained. Jiraiya, feeling guilty about his role in the war that had created so many orphans, agreed to teach them. He trained them for 3 years, and during that time he came to believe that Nagato, with his Rinnegan, was the reincarnation of the Sage of Six Paths, the child of prophecy who would bring peace to the world. After Jiraiya left, Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan formed an organization called Akatsuki. Their goal was simple: end the wars and bring peace to their country. They gathered many followers, and their message proved popular. Akatsuki became so well known and respected that Hanzo of the Salamander, Amegakure's leader, began to see them as a threat to his rule. Hanzo set a trap working with Danzo Shimura and Konoha's Root Division. He ambushed Yahiko and Nagato, took Konan hostage, and demanded that Nagato kill Yahiko to save her life. Yahiko, unwilling to let Nagato carry that burden, impaled himself on Nagato's kunai, dying with his last breath, expressing faith that Nagato would change the world. Yahiko's death broke something fundamental in Nagato. He'd spent years believing that peace could be achieved through understanding and cooperation, but Hanzo and Danzo had proven that the world would never willingly end the cycle of hatred. Enraged, Nagato summoned the demonic statue of the Outer Path and used it to slaughter Hanzo's men, though his legs were badly damaged in the process. Left crippled and frail, Nagato adopted the name Pain and created the 6 Paths of Pain, 6 corpses he controlled remotely, with Yahiko's body serving as the Diva Path because Nagato wanted him to lead the organization in spirit. Pain's new philosophy was simple. The world would never understand peace until it experienced overwhelming pain. Only through shared suffering could humanity learn to stop hurting each other. Pain took over Akatsuki and redirected it toward this goal. The organization began accepting mercenary work to fund its operations while secretly working toward collecting all 9-tailed beasts. The plan was to create a weapon so powerful that its mere existence would prevent war through fear, mutually assured destruction as a path to peace. Pain also led a civil war in Amegakure, eventually killing Hanzo and taking control of the village. He was worshipped as a god by the villagers, who saw his immense power and believed he could protect them. Pain eliminated everyone even remotely connected to Hanzo, including distant family members and acquaintances, to prevent any challenges to his rule. When Pain came to Konoha, it wasn't random. Konoha Ninja had killed his parents. Konoha's Root Division had worked with Hanzo to set the trap that killed Yahiko. Jiraiya, Nagato's teacher and the person he'd most respected, was from Konoha. The village represented everything wrong with the shinobi system. It proclaimed peace while participating in wars that devastated smaller countries. It trained child soldiers and sent them to die. It allowed people like Danzo to operate in the shadows, conducting atrocities in the name of protecting the village. Pain came to Konoha to make it understand the pain that places like Amegakure had suffered because of the 5 great nations' endless conflicts. The invasion was methodical and brutal. Pain used the animal path to bypass Konoha's barrier detection by entering from above, then summoned the other 5 paths inside the village. The Asura Preta and animal paths acted as diversions, destroying infrastructure and drawing out Konoha's forces, while the Deva, human, and Naraka paths, along with Conan, searched for Naruto by interrogating villagers. What they found shocked them. Every single person they questioned refused to reveal Naruto's location. Konoha, shinobi, who'd once seen Naruto as a demon who'd avoided him or treated him with contempt, now protected him with their lives. One shinobi told Conan to go to hell with a smile on his face rather than betray Naruto. Kakashi Hatake engaged the Deva path and discovered its weakness. The gravitational manipulation techniques had a 5-second cooldown period. He and Choza's team managed to damage the Asura path, but the cost was steep. Choza and his entire team were critically wounded, and Kakashi died from chakra exhaustion after using Kamui to save Choji. Konohamaru Sarutobi defeated the Naraka path, but these victories didn't matter. When the human path read Shizune's mind and discovered Naruto was at Mount Miyaboku, Pain decided he'd seen enough. The Deva path recalled all the other paths outside the village and unleashed a massive Shinra Tensei that destroyed most of Konoha in a single attack. The destruction was absolute. Buildings were flattened, streets were obliterated. The village that had stood for decades was reduced to a crater. Tsunade used every ounce of chakra she had to protect the villagers through Katsuyu's divisions, healing them remotely, but she couldn't save everyone. Hundreds of people died. Shizune died after discovering the secret of Pain's 6 paths. Kakashi died fighting the Deva path. Countless others, ninja and civilians alike, were crushed under rubble or killed in the chaos. The village's infrastructure was gone, its people were traumatized, and all of it happened because Pain wanted Konoha to understand what it felt like to lose everything. When Naruto arrived, he found a wasteland where his home used to be. He fought the 6 paths of pain with newly mastered Sage Mode, systematically destroying the Asura, human, animal Preta, and Naraka paths with perfected Rasen Shurikens and Sage techniques. But the Deva path, Yahiko's body, Pain's most powerful path, was the real challenge. The Deva path killed Fukasaku, one of Naruto's Toad mentors, and pinned Naruto down with black chakra receivers. As Naruto lay helpless, Pain explained his philosophy. The world was too full of hatred to ever achieve peace through understanding, so only overwhelming force and fear could stop the cycle of war. Hinata Hyuga's intervention changed everything. She confessed her love for Naruto and attacked Pain to save him, knowing she had no chance of winning. The Deva path struck her down, apparently killing her, and Naruto lost control. He entered a 6-tailed transformation, unleashing the 9 tails chakra in a berserk rage. The first Hokage's necklace, the one Tsunade had given him as a symbol of faith in his dreams, tried to suppress the transformation but was destroyed. The 9 tails took over Naruto's body completely, overwhelming Pain and forcing him to retreat outside the village to use Chibaku Tensei, a technique that created a miniature moon to trap the 9 tails. Inside his own mind, Naruto was drowning in despair. He'd failed to protect Konoha. He'd failed to protect Hinata. Pain's vision of peace through force seemed more realistic than Naruto's dream of peace through understanding. The 9 tails took advantage of this despair, convincing Naruto to remove the seal and release all 9 tails. Naruto was about to do it when Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, appeared in Naruto's subconscious. Minato revealed he was Naruto's father, repaired the seal, and reminded Naruto that he had the strength to change the world. With his resolve restored, Naruto broke free from the Chibaku Tensei and defeated the Deva path with a perfectly timed Rasengan during its 5-second cooldown window. Rather than kill Pain, Naruto used the black receivers to track down Nagato's real body. He found Nagato, emaciated, crippled, with chakra rods embedded in his back, hiding in a makeshift tree with Konan. Naruto asked why Nagato hated Konoha, what had made him this way, what could possibly justify destroying an entire village. Nagato told him everything: his parents' death at the hands of Konoha shinobi, his training under Jiraiya, the formation of Akatsuki, Yahiko's death orchestrated by Hanzo and Danzo, the decades of pain that had convinced him peace through understanding was impossible. He asked Naruto the same question Pain had asked earlier: "If you reject my solution, what's yours?" Naruto's answer was simple: he would break the cycle of revenge. He was angry at Nagato for killing Jiraiya and destroying Konoha, but he wouldn't kill Nagato because that would only cause others to seek revenge against him and perpetuate the cycle. He would find another way. Nagato was stunned by this response. It reminded him of Jiraiya, of the idealism he'd once had before Yahiko's death crushed it. He didn't know if Naruto's solution would work, but he decided to place his faith in it. As a sign of this faith, Nagato used the Outer Path's Samsara of Heavenly Life technique to revive everyone who died during his attack, sacrificing his own life in the process. Nagato's final words to Naruto were about pain, dreams, and the nature of their shared story. He recognized that the first part was Jiraiya, perfect, the ideal teacher and ninja. The second part was Nagato himself, a failure who couldn't even get their master's acknowledgement. The third part, the conclusion, would be Naruto. Nagato asked Naruto to become such a masterpiece that the failure of the second part would be like it never happened. He died with a smile on his face, wondering if perhaps all the circumstances that led to this end were the work of a real god. When Naruto returned to Konoha, the entire village was waiting for him. The people he'd saved, the ninja who'd once feared him, the civilians who'd once avoided him, everyone who'd ever looked at him and seen only the Nine Tails, greeted him as a hero. They cheered his name. They thanked him for saving them. Naruto's dream of being acknowledged had finally come true, but it came at a cost. The village was in ruins, hundreds had died, and even though Nagato revived them, the trauma remained. Tsunade was in a coma from using all her chakra to protect the villagers. The infrastructure was destroyed. And everyone knew that Konoha had been helpless against Pain until Naruto arrived. The casualties from Pain's assault scarred the survivors in ways that went beyond physical damage. People had watched their village be destroyed in seconds by a single technique. They'd seen loved ones die, then watched them come back to life through a technique they didn't understand. They'd learned that their village's actions, Danzo's involvement with Hanzo, Konoha Ninja killing Nagato's parents, the village's role in the wars that devastated smaller countries had directly contributed to creating Pain. The illusion that Konoha was safe, that the Hokage could protect them from anything, that the village's power made it invincible, was shattered. They understood now that they were vulnerable, that powerful enemies existed who had legitimate reasons to hate them, and that future attacks were inevitable. Rebuilding required confronting these truths. The village had to physically reconstruct itself, new buildings, new infrastructure, new systems to replace what was lost. But it also had to reckon with the fact that Pain's criticisms of the shinobi system were valid. The five great nations did start wars that devastated smaller countries. Villages did train child soldiers and send them to die. Leaders like Danzo did operate in the shadows, conducting atrocities that the village either ignored or tacitly approved. Konoha couldn't just rebuild what existed before and pretend nothing had changed. The village had to acknowledge its complicity in creating the cycle of hatred that produced Pain. The knowledge of what created Pain should have led to systemic change. It should have prompted Konoha to reevaluate its relationship with smaller nations, to address the root causes of conflict rather than just reacting to symptoms, to hold people like Danzo accountable for their actions instead of letting them operate with impunity. But that's not what happened. Instead, Danzo used the chaos after Pain's assault to manipulate the Fire Daimyo into making him acting 6th Hokage, while Tsunade was comatose. His first act was to label Sasuke Uchiha a missing nin and order his assassination, prioritizing the elimination of threats over addressing the systemic issues that created those threats in the first place. Naruto's victory over pain was significant not because he was stronger, though his mastery of Sage Mode was impressive, but because he offered an alternative to the cycle of revenge. Pain's solution was peace through overwhelming force and fear. Naruto's solution was peace through understanding and breaking the cycle of revenge. Neither solution was perfect, and Naruto himself admitted he didn't have all the answers, but by refusing to kill Nagato, by choosing to understand his pain rather than simply responding with more violence, Naruto demonstrated that change was possible. He proved that the child of prophecy wasn't someone who would bring peace through power, but someone who would bring peace through empathy. The tragedy of Pain's assault was that it was preventable. If Konoha Ninja hadn't killed Nagato's parents, if Danzo and Root hadn't conspired with Hanzo to set the trap that killed Yahiko, if Jiraiya had stayed with his students, instead of leaving them in a war-torn country, if any of the adults in positions of power had made better choices, Nagato might never have become Pain. The village that was destroyed by Pain was destroyed by the consequences of its own actions, and the actions of the shinobi system it was part of. Konoha didn't just face an enemy, it faced its sins. When the dust settled and the village began rebuilding, Naruto was celebrated as a hero. He'd saved everyone, he'd defeated Pain, he'd proven that the village's faith in him wasn't misplaced, but the harder truth, the truth that Konoha didn't want to fully confront, was that Naruto had also validated Pain's criticisms. By choosing understanding over revenge, by refusing to perpetuate the cycle of hatred, Naruto had done what the shinobi system as a whole had failed to do for generations. He'd broken the pattern. The question was whether Konoha and the shinobi world more broadly would learn from this or whether they would rebuild the same systems that created Pain in the first place. The answer came quickly. Danzo took power and immediately made decisions that prioritized short-term security over long-term peace. The 5 great nations continued operating as they always had. The cycle continued. Pain's assault had forced everyone to confront their failures, but confronting failures and actually changing because of them are two different things. Konoha rebuilt its buildings, honored its dead, and celebrated Naruto as a hero. But it didn't fundamentally change the systems that had created the conflict in the first place. That's the real legacy of Pain's assault. Not that the village was destroyed, but that even after being destroyed, even after being forced to face the consequences of its actions, Konoha chose to rebuild what was rather than create what could be. The villages survived the war, but their victory only buried the sins they refused to fix, setting the stage for a new conflict that would expose the system's failures once again. Oh, and before we go further, subscribing is free and helps us keep improving these videos. Now let's get back to it. Section 11. The Fourth War. Every village secret resurrected. The Fourth Shinobi. World War wasn't just a military conflict, it was an exhumation. Kabuto Yakushi's mastery of the summoning impure world reincarnation technique turned the battlefield into a graveyard come to life, forcing the living to face every mistake, every betrayal, every uncomfortable truth their villages had spent decades trying to bury. The allied shinobi forces, formed from 5 nations that had spent generations killing each other, suddenly had to fight alongside former enemies while confronting the reincarnated corpses of loved ones, mentors, and war criminals. Every secret that villages had kept, every atrocity they'd committed, every person they'd sacrificed was dragged back from the Pure Land and weaponized against them. The war lasted 3 days, but it excavated decades of sins. The war began because Tobi, who would later be revealed as Obito Uchiha, demanded that the 5 great nations surrender Naruto and Killer Bee, the final 2 Jinchuriki he needed to complete the 10 tails and cast the infinite Tsukuyomi. When the 5 Kage refused, Toby declared war. For the first time in history, all 5 major villages formed an alliance, the allied shinobi forces pooling 80,000 ninja and samurai against Toby's army of 100,000 white Zetsu clones and Kabuto's reincarnated shinobi. The symbolism was significant. Villages that had slaughtered each other for generations were now fighting side by side. But unity built on shared threat doesn't erase generations of hatred, and the cracks showed immediately. The impure world reincarnation was the perfect weapon for exposing hypocrisy. Created by Tobirama Senju, the second Hokage, who'd spent his life preaching about protecting the village. As a suicide bombing technique, it bound the souls of the dead to living sacrifices, creating immortal warriors who regenerated from any damage and had infinite chakra. Kabuto had perfected it to the point where reincarnated ninja retained nearly all their original power and personality. This meant the allied forces weren't just fighting zombies, they were fighting their teachers, their parents, their former comrades, their heroes, people who remembered them, recognized them, and in many cases felt genuine grief about being forced to kill them. Asuma Sarutobi was reincarnated and forced to fight his former students, Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji. He apologized while trying to kill them. He gave them tactical advice about how to defeat him, while Kabuto's control forced him to use his strongest techniques against them. Shikamaru had to strategize ways to seal his own mentor, the man who taught him about protecting the next generation, while that same mentor was being puppeteered into betraying everything he believed in when they finally sealed him. Asuma's last words were about how proud he was of them, how they'd grown into the kind of shinobi he'd hoped they would become. His students had to seal away someone they loved because Kabuto had turned protecting the future into a weapon against itself. Dan Kato, Tsunade's dead lover, was reincarnated and sent to the battlefield. He tried to reach her using his spirit transformation technique to transfer chakra to her while apologizing for being used as a weapon against the village he'd wanted to protect. Tsunade, who'd spent decades running from the trauma of watching him bleed out in her arms, had to face him again, had to watch him be controlled like a puppet, had to see the dream he'd died pursuing be turned into a tool for destroying everything he'd valued. The war didn't just resurrect bodies, it resurrected every failure, every loss, every moment of inadequacy that people had spent years trying to forget. The Gold and Silver brothers, Kinkaku and Ginkaku, were ancient Kumo legends who'd eaten the Nine-Tails' flesh and survived, gaining some of its chakra. They were reincarnated with the treasured tools of the Sage of Six Paths, weapons that could seal anyone who spoke their most frequently used word. Darui, leading the First Division, had to fight them using the very same tools they wielded, turning their legendary power against them. But the fight exposed something uncomfortable. These heroes of Kumogakure were also criminals who'd attempted a coup and killed the second Hokage during a peace treaty signing. Villages celebrated people as legends, while ignoring that those same legends were often war criminals whose actions had perpetuated cycles of violence. Hanzo of the Salamander was reincarnated, forcing Mifune, who'd once fought him and survived, to face him again. But Hanzo wasn't the legendary warrior Mifune remembered. He was a shell of his former self, weakened by paranoia and political maneuvering, killed by pain years earlier. After becoming exactly the kind of corrupt leader he'd once opposed, Mifune defeated him, but the victory was hollow. It proved that even the greatest warriors could fall from grace, that the legends people built their identities around were often just men who'd compromised themselves for power and died forgotten. The impure world reincarnation forced everyone to see their heroes as they actually were, not as mythology had portrayed them. The second Mizukage and third Raikage were reincarnated to fight the fourth division. The third Raikage was nearly unstoppable. His body was so durable that nothing could pierce it, and his attacks were strong enough to cut through anything. Naruto's clone eventually defeated him by maneuvering him into attacking himself, using the Raikage's own power to break his own defense. The symbolism was obvious. The previous generation's strength had become a weapon against itself, and only by turning that strength inward could it be overcome. Meanwhile, the second Mizukage, who'd killed the second Tsuchikage in mutual combat during a past war, was forced to fight alongside Onoki, the third Tsuchikage, who'd witnessed both their deaths. Old enemies working together, old wars being relitigated, old grudges being confronted while trying not to let them interfere with the present. Then there was Madara Uchiha. Kabuto reincarnated him as his ultimate trump card, and Madara immediately proved why he was considered a legend. He fought the entire 4th Division by himself, dropping meteors on them, using wood release to create forests that drained their chakra, deploying Susanoo with such ease that it seemed effortless. He killed thousands. He treated the Allied forces like they were insects, and he did it while monologuing about how pathetic the current generation was, how they'd grown weak without experiencing real war, how they didn't understand what it meant to fight for survival. Madara was everything wrong with the old shinobi system. Personified, a man so powerful and so convinced of his own righteousness that he saw everyone else as obstacles to be eliminated. The 5 Kage, Gaara, Tsunade, Onoki, and Mae fought Madara together and barely survived. He broke Tsunade in half with his Susanoo sword. He crushed his arm, he overwhelmed Gaara's sand, he mocked Onoki for getting old and weak, and when Kabuto was finally defeated and the Impurity World reincarnation was released, Madara severed the connection to the technique, making himself truly immortal. He'd figured out how to break free of the one constraint that limited him, turning him from a reanimated pawn into an independent threat. The Kage, who represented the current generation's leadership, were left broken and helpless, while Madara went to join Obito and complete the Eye of the Moon plan. Obito's reveal was the war's most devastating truth. When Kakashi finally destroyed Tobi's mask, he found Obito Uchiha underneath, his former teammate who'd supposedly died in the Third Shinobi World War, whose death had haunted Kakashi for decades, whose Sharingan Kakashi had inherited. Obito explained everything. He'd been saved by Madara, he'd watched Rin die at Kakashi's hands through a twisted set of circumstances orchestrated by Madara, and he'd decided that reality was so broken that it needed to be replaced entirely with the infinite Tsukuyomi, a genjutsu that would trap everyone in a dream of their perfect world. But Obito's most devastating revelation came when he explained the Uchiha massacre. He told Sasuke that yes, Itachi had killed the clan, but he'd done it on orders from Konoha's leadership, specifically Danzo Shimura, working with the third Hokage's implicit approval. The Uchiha were planning a coup because they'd been marginalized and suspected after the Nine Tails attack, so Konoha's leaders decided it was easier to eliminate the entire clan than to address the systemic discrimination that had driven them to rebellion. Itachi had been forced to choose between his clan and his village, and he'd chosen the village, spending the rest of his life as a missing nin to preserve Konoha's stability. This information broke something fundamental in the Allied forces' narrative. They were fighting to protect their villages, but those same villages had committed genocide against their own people. Konoha had ordered the massacre of an entire clan, including children, because it was politically convenient, and everyone in leadership had known. Hiruzen had known. Danzo had known. The advisors had known. They'd all decided that mass murder was preferable to addressing the root causes of the Uchiha's grievances. The allied shinobi forces were fighting to preserve a system that had already proven itself willing to sacrifice anyone who became inconvenient. Itachi himself was reincarnated and forced to fight Naruto and Killer Bee alongside Nagato, but Itachi had prepared for this possibility. He'd planted a crow with Shisui's eye in Naruto before his death, programmed to activate Kotoa Matsukami when it encountered his reincarnated self. This freed him from Kabuto's control, allowing him to team up with Naruto to seal Nagato. Itachi then went to confront Kabuto, directly bringing Sasuke with him. The brothers fought together for the first time since childhood, with Itachi using Izanami, a genjutsu that trapped Kabuto in an infinite loop until he accepted himself, to force Kabuto to release the impure world reincarnation. Itachi's last words to Sasuke were about not being perfect, about making mistakes, and about how Sasuke didn't need to forgive him. He just needed to figure out who he wanted to become. The war's casualties exposed how little the system had actually changed. Neji Hyuga died protecting Naruto and Hinata from the Ten Tails attack. His death was framed as heroic, as a choice made out of love rather than obligation. But the reality was darker. Neji, who'd spent his entire life raging against a system that enslaved branch house members to protect the main house, died fulfilling exactly that role. He died protecting Hinata, the main house heir. His last words were about understanding his father's choice to die for his brother, about how he was glad to die protecting people he loved. But his death also proved that the Hyuga clan's curse seal system had shaped him so completely that even when he thought he was making a free choice, he was still fulfilling the destiny the system had assigned him. Neji's death could have been prevented. He had the Byakugan, which gave him 360-degree vision. He had the rotation technique, an absolute defense that could deflect attacks, but he chose to use his body as a shield instead, chose to die protecting the main house heir, chose to fulfill the branch house's purpose. Critics rightly pointed out that this made his entire character arc, learning that destiny wasn't fixed, that he could choose his own path, that the branch house system was wrong, completely meaningless. Kishimoto later admitted he killed Neji primarily to bring Naruto and Hinata closer together, to give them a shared trauma that would facilitate their relationship. Neji died to be a plot device for a romance, and the system that had enslaved him continued unchanged after his death. The war's later stages exposed the fundamental lie behind the allied shinobi forces. Madara and Obito successfully revived the Ten Tails, an ancient entity of pure destructive power. They used it to attack the allied forces, killing thousands. The allied headquarters was destroyed, killing Shikaku Nara and Inochi Yamanaka, the strategic and communications coordinators who'd been essential to the alliance's coordination. Without them, the allied forces began to fragment. Old divisions resurfaced. Villages began prioritizing their own survival over the collective good. The unity that had seemed so strong when they were winning started to crack as soon as they faced real adversity. Obito became the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, gaining godlike power. He nearly succeeded in casting the infinite Tsukuyomi until Naruto, with help from Sasuke, who'd been revived by Orochimaru and had decided to join the war effort, managed to extract the tailed beast from Obito, but this victory was immediately undermined when Black Zetsu, revealing himself as the will of Kaguya Otsutsuki, took control of Obito's body and forced him to revive Madara with the Rinne Rebirth technique. Madara, now alive and at full power, immediately resealed all the tailed beasts into the Ten Tails and became its Jinchuriki himself. Madara's plan was to cast the infinite Tsukuyomi, trapping everyone in an eternal dream. He explained that this was mercy. The real world was too full of suffering, so he would give everyone the dream of a perfect world instead. He activated the techniques, and everyone except Team 7, protected by Sasuke's Susanoo and the reincarnated Hokage, were trapped in individual dreams. The technique also wrapped people in the God Tree's roots, slowly draining their chakra to feed Madara. Peace through force was being replaced by peace through illusion, but both solutions avoided addressing the actual problems that caused conflict. Then Black Zetsu betrayed Madara. It turned out that Madara had never been in control. He'd been manipulated by Black Zetsu, which was actually Kaguya Otsutsuki's will given form. Black Zetsu possessed Madara and transformed him into Kaguya, the progenitor of chakra who'd been sealed away centuries earlier. Everything, Madara's plan, Obito's plan, the entire history of the shinobi world had been orchestrated by Kaguya trying to reclaim her power. The legendary Madara Uchiha, the man who'd shaped generations of conflict, turned out to be just another pawn in someone else's plan. The war ended when Team 7, working together for the first time since Sasuke's defection, sealed Kaguya using the 6 paths. Chibaku Tensei, the infinite Tsukuyomi, was released. The tailed beasts were freed. The reincarnated Hokage were sent back to the Pure Land. Madara died from having the 10 tails extracted. The Fourth Shinobi World War was officially over. The Allied shinobi forces had won. But what had they actually won? The villages were devastated. Tens of thousands were dead. The secrets that had been exposed, the Uchiha massacre, the hypocrisy of the village system, the fact that even legendary heroes were deeply flawed people couldn't be unexposed. The war's aftermath was telling. Sasuke, who'd learned about the Uchiha massacre and the village system's corruption, initially planned to kill the Kage and reshape the world by force, becoming a sole dictator who would personally decide good from evil. Naruto fought him at the Valley of the End, and after they both nearly died, Sasuke admitted defeat and surrendered. The infinite Tsukuyomi was ended, the tailed beasts were freed, the world was saved, but the systems that had caused the problems, the 5 great nation structure, the child soldier training, the village first mentality that justified any atrocity, remained intact. The Allied shinobi forces reformed into the Shinobi Union, a voluntary alliance of villages that would supposedly work together to prevent future wars. Relations between villages improved. Technology advanced rapidly in the era of peace that followed, but the fundamental issues were never addressed. The Hyuga clan kept its cursed seal system, villages kept training child soldiers, the power structures that had enabled people like Danzo to commit atrocities remained in place. The only thing that had changed was that people were trying to be nicer to each other, which is not the same as actually fixing broken systems. Some people couldn't adjust to peace at all. Ao, the Kiri sensor ninja who'd been celebrated as a hero for his role in the war, became disillusioned and eventually joined Kara, a new organization that opposed the shinobi system. He felt that the peace was hollow, that his injuries had left him purposeless, that the world had moved on without learning anything. Others turned to crime or terrorism, unable to find a place in a world without war. The sudden demilitarization destroyed careers, left veterans struggling to adapt, and created resentment among those who felt their sacrifices were being forgotten. The Fourth Shinobi World War succeeded in creating temporary unity through shared threat, but it failed to address the root causes of conflict. The impure world reincarnation forced everyone to face their past, to confront every mistake and atrocity their villages had committed. But facing uncomfortable truths and actually changing because of them are different things. Villages learned they could work together when necessary, but they didn't learn to question the systems that made war necessary in the first place. They defeated external threats like Madara, Obito, and Kaguya, but they left the internal threats, the corruption, the inequality, the willingness to sacrifice people for convenience completely intact. Neji's death symbolized this failure perfectly. He died believing he'd broken free from destiny, believing he'd chosen his own path, believing his sacrifice meant something, but he died fulfilling the exact role the branch house system had assigned him, protecting the main house. The system that enslaved him continued after his death. His sacrifice changed nothing about the fundamental injustice of the Hyuga clan's structure. He was celebrated as a hero while the system that had oppressed him remained in place, which meant his death functionally endorsed that system. The old system made one final claim on him, and everyone called it noble. The war exposed every uncomfortable truth about the shinobi system, that villages committed genocide against their own people, that heroes were often war criminals, that the previous generations' failures created the current generation's conflicts, that peace built on ignoring injustice isn't actually peace. Every secret was dragged into the light, every lie was exposed, every compromise was revealed. And after all that, after being forced to face decades of sins literally resurrected and weaponized against them, the shinobi world chose to rebuild essentially the same system with minor improvements. They chose comfort over change, stability over justice, peace over accountability. That's the real legacy of the Fourth Shinobi World War. Not that the Allied forces defeated Akatsuki, or that they sealed Kaguya, or that they ended the infinite Tsukuyomi, but that they were given a perfect opportunity to confront and fix every systemic failure that had caused generations of suffering, and they chose not to. The dead were literally brought back to testify to the crimes of the living, and the living decided they'd rather forget than change. Every village secret was resurrected, examined, and then quietly reburied once the immediate threat was over. The war ended, the system survived, and everyone pretended that was victory. The war dragged every secret into the light, showed the village's failures, and yet the so-called victors returned to peace without fixing anything, passing the same broken system to the next generation. Section 12, The New Era, Progress and Lingering Problems. Naruto Uzumaki became 7th Hokage and fulfilled his childhood dream. The village celebrated him as their hero. He promised to break the cycles of hatred that had destroyed previous generations. Peace arrived. The cycles continued anyway. Technology transformed the village rapidly. Laptops replaced scrolls. Trains connected formerly isolated villages. Scientific ninja tools let civilians perform jutsu without chakra. Konoha expanded beyond its walls, becoming an actual city rather than a military compound. The wars ended. Akatsuki was defeated. Kaguya was sealed. By every visible metric, the shinobi world had never been safer or more prosperous. The systems that caused generations of suffering remained untouched. Villages still trained child soldiers. The Hyuga curse seal system persisted. The 5 great nations still dominated smaller countries economically and militarily. Powerful families operated with minimal oversight. Peace arrived while the machinery that created conflict stayed fully operational. Everyone was just nicer about the exploitation now. Naruto's approach to being Hokage revealed how his childhood shaped him. He overworked constantly, involving himself in every decision, attending every event, responding to every crisis personally. He believed working hard enough would prevent anyone from suffering like he had. This dedication meant regular all-nighters, endless meetings, and gradual neglect of his own family. He'd spent his childhood desperate for acknowledgement and family. When he finally had both, he sacrificed them for everyone else. Boruto Uzumaki grew up resenting his father. The Hokage had time for everyone except his own son. Himawari accepted the absence more easily, but both children felt it. Naruto recreated his own childhood isolation for his kids, just with better material circumstances. Boruto had everything Naruto lacked: family, village acceptance, natural talent, and remained miserable because his father was never there. The generational divide became the new era's defining feature. Those who fought in the 4th Shinobi World War understood war's cost. They'd watched friends die, villages burn, armies be decimated. Peace mattered because they knew the alternative. Their children grew up in unprecedented peace. They'd never experienced real war, never lost comrades to violence, never faced impossible choices regularly. This created mutual incomprehension. Parents saw their children as spoiled and unprepared. Children saw their parents as out of touch and obsessed with past conflicts. Boruto specifically resented being defined by his father's legacy. Everyone called him the Hokage's son instead of acknowledging his own talents. He grew up in Naruto's shadow the same way Naruto grew up in the 4th Hokage's, but proximity rather than absence caused Boruto's resentment. Technology changed how ninja operated without changing why they existed. Scientific ninja tools democratized power in potentially revolutionary ways. The academy integrated these tools into training rather than questioning whether the village still needed standing armies. Villages made their forces more efficient rather than considering whether they needed such forces at all. The tool was new. The militaristic mindset remained unchanged. Kawaki Kawaki's arrival exposed how little had changed about handling traumatized children. Kawaki had been raised by an abusive father, sold to Kara, experimented on, and weaponized. When he escaped to Konoha, Naruto took him in, offering the family Naruto never received as a child. This was admirable. This was also a band-aid on a systemic wound. Konoha's response to traumatized children remained find one sympathetic adult rather than build systems preventing child trauma in the first place. Kawaki and Boruto mirrored Naruto and Sasuke's relationship. Kawaki was the traumatized outsider, desperate for family and willing to sacrifice anything protecting it. Boruto was the privileged insider who took what he had for granted until threats emerged. They bonded as brothers initially, their fundamental worldviews, Kawaki believing peace required eliminating all threats, Boruto believing in protecting everyone including enemies, set them on a collision course. The cycle repeated despite everyone's best efforts. Ishiki Otsutsuki's attack demonstrated the village's continued vulnerability. Despite technological advancement, despite having Naruto and Sasuke at full power, despite decades of preparation, a single enemy nearly destroyed everything. Naruto used Baryon mode, a transformation that would eventually kill him, just to weaken Ishiki enough for Kawaki to finish him. The system still demanded leaders sacrifice themselves. The expectation hadn't changed. The Otsutsuki threat revealed uncomfortable truths. All the progress, technology, and peace existed on borrowed time. The Otsutsuki clan viewed Earth as harvestable resources. Every conflict in shinobi history had been influenced by their manipulations. Villages spent generations fighting each other while remaining ignorant of the actual existential threat. Kaguya had been running from her clan. Madara and Obito were pawns in Otsutsuki plans. The entire world order existed because one Otsutsuki betrayed her clan thousands of years ago. Sasuke's role highlighted what remained unfixed about redemption. After years as a missing nin, after nearly destroying everything, Sasuke was eventually pardoned. His redemption consisted of a wandering the world, gathering intelligence, essentially self-exile. He missed Sarada's childhood the way his father missed his, perpetuating absent Uchiha fathers. The village accepted his service without actually integrating him into the community. That's pragmatism wearing forgiveness's clothes. Surface-level changes obscured systemic continuity. Villages cooperated more. Technology improved quality of life. Trade flourished. People traveled freely between nations. These improvements mattered genuinely. They were built on the same foundation that caused generations of suffering. The 5 great nations still dominated smaller countries. Villages still trained children for combat starting at 12 or younger. Powerful clans maintained internal hierarchies that enslaved family members. The village survived its darkest chapters without learning from them. Konoha still revered the first Hokage, despite his brother creating Edo Tensei as a weapon. They celebrated the 4th Hokage, despite him sealing the Nine Tails in his infant son without considering Naruto's resulting childhood. They honored the 3rd Hokage despite his enabling Danzo and failing to protect village children. They saw Itachi as a tragic hero instead of asking why a 13-year-old was positioned where murdering his family seemed like the best available option. Generational trauma persisted stubbornly. Naruto's unresolved childhood abandonment issues led him to neglect his own children. Sasuke's incomplete processing of the Uchiha massacre led him to abandon Sarada the same way his father abandoned him. Sakura accepted Sasuke's absence and made excuses rather than demanding better treatment. The main characters became parents and, despite best intentions, recreated many dynamics that traumatized them as children. Boruto's ultimate fate represented the cycle's refusal to break. When Momoshiki fully manifested through Boruto, when Kawaki decided Boruto was too dangerous to exist, when Ida's omnipotence ability rewrote everyone's memories so Boruto and Kawaki switched places, all of this resulted in Boruto being exiled, branded criminal, hunted by people who once loved him. He was living Sasuke's story again, different details, same fundamental pattern. The new era's greatest failure was confusing peace with justice. Villages achieved peace by defeating external threats and establishing trade relationships. They never achieved justice because they never addressed internal inequalities, systemic exploitation, or the willingness to sacrifice individuals for collective benefit. They stopped actively fighting each other. They kept all structures that made those fights inevitable. Naruto and Hinata being sealed away in a dimension by Kawaki meant the 7th Hokage, who promised to break cycles, failed to break the most fundamental one: the expectation that each generation sacrifices itself for the next without addressing why that sacrifice is necessary. Naruto survived his childhood, became Hokage, created peace, raised a family, and still ended up sealed away by someone he tried to help, leaving his son to face consequences alone. The village's willingness to believe Boruto killed Naruto revealed how little changed about mob mentality and scapegoating. When Ida's omnipotence rewrote their memories, they accepted the new narrative without resistance because it fit existing templates: the rebellious son, the devoted protector, the tragic downfall. The village's capacity for collective delusion, for accepting comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, for turning on people they once celebrated, all remained fully intact. Surviving darkness and learning from darkness are different things. Konoha survived every catastrophe. Surviving required having enough people willing to sacrifice themselves to preserve the status quo. The village kept finding heroes willing to protect a system that failed them. That willingness enabled the system to continue failing the next generation. The most honest assessment: the village learned to manage crises better without learning to prevent them. It learned to celebrate heroes more vocally without learning to stop creating situations requiring heroes. The village survived its dark chapters and called that success without asking whether survival alone was acceptable. When Boruto stood outside the village, hunted and alone, working with Sasuke to free his parents and clear his name, he proved the cycle continued. Another traumatized child with immense power, cast out by his village, forced to survive while everyone he loved believed lies about him. Different generation, different circumstances, same fundamental story. The village that created Naruto's suffering, that drove Sasuke to defection, that produced Pain's justified rage, recreated those exact conditions for the next generation. They learned nothing that mattered. They changed nothing fundamental. They bought time until the cycle repeated itself again. Alright, that's the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe. It's free and really helps us keep bringing you more of this content.